The manager's voice cut across the entrance like a blade. Sir, you cannot bring that animal inside. Store policy. No exceptions. The old man stopped, one hand resting on the dog's head. The Belgian Malinois sat perfectly still beside him, eyes forward, not a tremor in its muscled frame. The dog wore a tactical vest, faded and worn, but the old man's hand never left its back. I understand, he said quietly, but I need him with me. The manager's eyes narrowed. I don't care if you need him. Health codes. Liability. You want to shop here, the dog stays outside. What the manager didn't know, what nobody in that store knew, was that the vest under his dismissive gaze carried markings that told a story of blood, fire, and 37 lives saved in places that didn't exist on any map. And in exactly 8 minutes, when those markings became visible, everything in that store would change. The automatic doors had barely begun to close behind them when the confrontation started. The old man wore clothes that had seen too many washes, jeans with frayed cuffs, a flannel shirt with one button missing. His boots were worn but clean, laced with the precision of long habit. The dog matched his stillness, a perfectly trained shadow at his left side. Around them, shoppers slowed, carts pausing mid-aisle as voices rose near the entrance. The manager stepped closer, his pressed shirt and company name tag catching the fluorescent light. He gestured broadly, making sure nearby customers could see his authority. Look, I'm trying to be nice here, but you're making a scene. Either tie the dog up outside or leave. Those are your options. His voice carried the practiced tone of someone used to being obeyed, someone who had never been told no by people who mattered. The old man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. With respect, sir, I can't do that. The dog needs to stay with me. His hand moved in what looked like a casual pat, but the dog's ear twitched in response. A signal. Recognition. The movement was too precise to be random, too controlled to be nervous habit. A woman with a shopping cart stopped 3 feet away, pretending to examine her phone but watching the confrontation unfold. Near the pharmacy counter, a man in his 30s paused, grocery list forgotten in his hand. The manager's voice grew louder, feeding on the audience. I've heard every excuse in the book, buddy. Everyone thinks their pet is special. Everyone thinks the rules don't apply to them. But I run this store, and I'm telling you, that dog does not come inside. The old man's voice remained level, quiet enough that people had a strain to hear. He's not a pet. The words carried weight that made the woman with the cart glance up sharply. Something in his tone, in the way he stood, suggested depths the manager hadn't considered. The manager laughed, sharp and dismissive. Right? Let me guess. Emotional support animal? Therapy dog? He made air quotes with his fingers, playing to the small crowd that had gathered. I've seen the paperwork people print off the internet. Unless you've got actual documentation from a licensed physician, you and your dog are leaving. Now, the dog didn't move, didn't whine or pull at the leash that hung loose in the old man's hand. Just sat, eyes forward, breathing steady. The kind of discipline that took years to build, that couldn't be faked or bought from any pet store training class. In the hard morning light filtering through the store's front windows, the vest's fabric showed where patterns, stress marks around the attachment points where gear had once hung heavy. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world, we'd love to know where you're joining us from. Stories like this one happen in every community, maybe even yours. Drop a comment below with your city or country. And if these stories of hidden heroes speak to you, please subscribe. Now let's continue. The old man reached into his jacket pocket slowly, movements deliberate. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, fingers trembling slightly as he opened it. Before he could remove whatever documentation he carried, the manager held up his hand. I don't need to see anything. Store policy is clear. No dogs except certified service animals for the blind or mobility impaired. Your dog isn't wearing a service vest, and you're clearly walking just fine. He crossed his arms, stance widening. Final warning. Leave or I call security. Around them, the small crowd grew. A teenage employee stocking shelves nearby had stopped working, boxes forgotten at his feet. An elderly woman with a cane shook her head, lips pressed thin with disapproval, though it wasn't clear which party earned her judgment. The man near the pharmacy took a step closer, eyes narrowed as he studied the dog's vest with sudden intensity. The old man's hand returned to the dog's head, fingers threading through the fur behind its ears. The dog leaned into the touch fractionally, the only break in its rigid attention. "I just need a few things," the old man said. "Medication. Supplies. I'll be quick. Please." The last word cost him something. Pride maybe, or the last shred of dignity he'd been clinging to since walking through those doors. The manager's face hardened. "You're not listening. I don't care what sob story you've got. Rules are rules, and they exist for a reason. Health department shuts us down if we let every Tom, Dick, and Harry bring their mutts inside." He stepped forward, closing the distance, voice dropping to what he probably thought was a threatening register. "You got 10 seconds to walk back through those doors, or I'm calling the cops. And trust me, they won't be as patient as I've been." The old man stood perfectly still. His hand tightened on the dog's vest, knuckles going white against the faded nylon. The dog's muscles tensed beneath the fabric, not aggressive but alert, reading its handler's stress through touch alone. For just a moment, something flickered across the old man's face. Not anger, not fear, something colder, something that suggested he'd faced worse threats than store managers with power complexes. Then it passed. His shoulders settled back into their usual slump. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "I understand." He turned slowly, the dog pivoting with him in perfect synchronization. Their movements matched like dancers who'd practiced the routine 10,000 times, who knew each other's balance and rhythm without thought. But as they turned, as the old man's hand adjusted its grip on the vest's handle, the fabric shifted. Just an inch. Just enough. And in that shift, under the harsh commercial lighting, a patch became visible. Dark green background, gold thread, a skull with crossed bones beneath it. And above the skull, letters that the man near the pharmacy could suddenly see clearly. Letters that made his face go pale. Letters that made his hand start to shake as understanding crashed through him like ice water. Because some vests aren't just vests. Some vests are earned in blood and fire. And some dogs aren't just dogs. They're legends that happen to have 4 legs and a heartbeat that kept going long after lesser animals would have quit. The man near the pharmacy's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. He took another step forward, hand rising as if to call out. But the old man and his dog were already moving toward the exit, that perfect synchronization carrying them past the checkout lanes, past the customer service desk, past the automatic doors that whooshed open to release them back into the cold morning air. The manager watched them go, arms still crossed, satisfaction clear on his face. He'd maintained control, enforced the rules, kept the store safe from liability. He had no idea that in the next 4 minutes his phone would ring, that his district supervisor would be on the other end, voice shaking with barely controlled fury, that the man near the pharmacy was already pulling out his cell phone, fingers flying across the screen as he typed a message to someone who would make phone calls that would make other phone calls that would eventually reach people who very much wanted to know why a decorated military working dog had just been turned away from a civilian store. But that was 4 minutes away. For now, the old man and his dog stood outside in the parking lot, morning sun warm on their faces. The old man's hand never left the dog's head. "Good boy," he whispered. The dog's tail moved once, twice. A small wag that said everything about trust and partnership and years spent relying on each other when everything else had fallen apart. Inside the store, the man near the pharmacy was already making his way toward the manager. His face had gone from pale to flushed, jaw set with purpose. The teenage employee was pulling out his phone, thumb hovering over a contact labeled Mom Army Nurse. The elderly woman with the cane was shaking her head more vigorously now. Disapproval definitely aimed at the manager as she navigated her cart toward the exit. The manager noticed none of it. He was already turning back toward his office, crisis averted, authority maintained. He had paperwork to finish, inventory to check, a conference call with corporate in 20 minutes. He had no time for homeless-looking men with dogs they couldn't control, no patience for people who thought rules didn't apply to them. What he didn't have was any understanding of what those patches meant. what that skull represented, what operations that dog had run, what missions it had completed, what impossible odds it had overcome while men in suits made decisions from air-conditioned offices thousands of miles away. He didn't know that the vest he dismissed so casually had been custom-made at a base whose name was classified, that the dog wearing it had saved more American lives than most soldiers ever saw in combat. He didn't know any of it, but he was about to learn. The old man's name was Vincent Carver, though most people who'd known him in another life called him something else entirely. He stood in the parking lot now, hands still resting on the dog's head, and remembered the first time he'd seen those eyes. Afghanistan, Helmand Province, 2011. The dog had been 10 months old then, all puppy energy wrapped around a core of pure determination that the trainers said they'd never seen before. The dog's name was Razor, not a name Vincent had chosen, but one the dog had earned 3 days in a training when he detected an IED that 5 human sweepers had missed, probably saving a dozen lives before his first birthday. Vincent had been assigned as his handler because the other candidates couldn't match the dog's intensity, couldn't keep up with an animal that seemed to understand the stakes of every mission better than most humans ever would. Vincent walked slowly toward the far end of the parking lot where he'd left his truck. 15 years old, rust eating through the wheel wells. But it ran, and the back seat was set up exactly the way Razor needed it. Water bowl secured, blanket that still smelled faintly of the Afghan dust they'd never quite been able to wash out completely. A space that was safe, familiar, the only consistency in a world that had stopped making sense a long time ago. Razor walked at his left side, position perfect, head up and alert. To anyone watching, they looked like an old man and his well-trained pet. Nobody saw the way Vincent's right hand trembled unless it was touching the dog. Nobody noticed how his eyes tracked every vehicle in the parking lot, noting make, model, occupants, threat assessment running on autopilot even after all these years. Nobody understood that the dog wasn't just a companion. It was the only thing keeping Vincent tethered to a world he no longer recognized. The trembling had started 2 years after they'd come home. Not all at once, but gradually, like a building settling into a foundation that couldn't quite support its weight. Vincent would wake up gasping, Razor's cold nose pressed against his face, the dog's weight across his chest anchoring him back to reality. The VA had given him pills with names he couldn't pronounce. They'd helped for a while. Then they hadn't. Then he'd stopped being able to afford them anyway. He reached the truck and opened the back door. Razor hopped inside without command, circling once on the blanket before settling into position. Vincent's hand shook harder as he reached for the water bowl, had to use both hands to keep from spilling as he filled it from the gallon jug he kept on the floor. The dog watched him with eyes that had seen things no animal should have to see, that had stayed steady when everything else fell apart. Vincent remembered the day everything changed. The day that turned him from a decorated handler with 3 tours and a chest full of commendations into a man who couldn't walk into a grocery store without being thrown out. October 19th. 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days ago. He could still see Sarah's face, could still hear the doctor's voice saying the words that made no sense, that couldn't possibly be true because Sarah was only 38 and they had plans and a daughter who needed her mother. Aggressive, inoperable, weeks, maybe months. Every word had landed like a physical blow. Vincent had stood in that hospital corridor with Razor pressed against his leg, the dog sensing something catastrophic even though he couldn't possibly understand what. Sarah had smiled when Vincent finally walked into her room. She'd smiled and said it would be okay, that they'd figure it out together, that she wasn't scared as long as she had him. She died 6 weeks later. Vincent had held her hand while Razor lay on the floor beside the hospice bed, quiet and still except for the occasional whine that sounded heartbreakingly human. Their daughter Natalie had been there too, 17 years old, and try not to cry because her mother had asked them both to be strong. Vincent had promised, had sworn he'd take care of everything, that he'd be there for Natalie, that they'd get through it. He'd lasted 4 months. 4 months of trying to be normal, trying to work, trying to parent a grieving teenager when he couldn't even keep himself together. 4 months of waking up in the night, certain he was back in Helmand, certain Sarah was calling for him, certain that something terrible was happening and he was failing everyone who needed him. Razor had tried, had stayed close, had pressed against Vincent during the worst nights, had refused to eat when Vincent forgot to feed him. But it hadn't been enough. Nothing had been enough. So one morning Vincent had written a note. I love you. I'm sorry. Live your life. Don't look for me. He'd left it on the kitchen table where Natalie would find it, had packed a bag with 3 changes of clothes and everything that reminded him of Sarah, and had driven away with Razor in the back seat. He told himself it was temporary, that he just needed space to clear his head, that he'd go back when he was better. That had been 3 years, 4 months, and 14 days ago. He hadn't gone back, hadn't called, had watched from a distance as Natalie graduated high school, started college, began building a life that didn't include a father who'd abandoned her when she needed him most. He convinced himself it was better this way, that she deserved better than a broken man who couldn't hold a job, couldn't sleep through the night, couldn't walk into a store without his hands shaking. Vincent closed the truck's back door and leaned against it, forehead pressed to the cool metal. Inside, Razor whined softly. The sound pulled Vincent back from the edge of memories that threatened to drown him. He opened the driver's door and climbed in, movement stiff. The truck's interior smelled like dog and old coffee and the particular staleness of someone living in their vehicle. A sleeping bag was wadded in the passenger seat. Fast food wrappers littered the floor despite Vincent's best efforts to keep things clean. He'd been trying to get into that store for 3 days. It was the only pharmacy within 20 miles that carried the specific brand of medication Razor needed. The old dog had arthritis now, hips starting to fail after too many hard landings, too many miles covered at full sprint through terrain that would break most animals. The medication helped. Without it, Razor would be in pain. Vincent could handle a lot of things. He could handle the trembling, the nightmares, the crushing weight of guilt that never eased. He couldn't handle knowing Razor was suffering because Vincent was too much of a coward to fight back when some store manager decided they didn't belong. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably another missed call from a number he didn't recognize. Bill collectors, maybe, or the VA, trying to reach him about appointments he'd missed. He didn't check. Didn't have the energy to face whatever new disaster was waiting in his voicemail. Instead, he started the truck, the engine turning over with a cough that suggested it wouldn't last much longer. Razor's head appeared between the seats, nose pushing against Vincent's shoulder. The old man reached back, fingers finding the familiar shape of the dog's skull, the soft ears, the scars hidden beneath the fur. You deserved better than this, Vincent whispered. The dog huffed a breath that might have been disagreement. They'd had this conversation before. Human words the dog couldn't understand, but tone that transcribed perfectly. You deserved a handler who didn't fall apart, who didn't end up living in a truck in parking lots. But Razor had never left, had never looked at Vincent with anything but trust and loyalty and a devotion that Vincent knew he hadn't earned. Not anymore. The dog had followed him into hell more than once, had saved his life in ways both literal and figurative. And now Vincent couldn't even get him the medication he needed without being humiliated by some manager who saw nothing but a homeless man with a mutt. Vincent put the truck in reverse, started to back out of space. His eyes caught movement near the store entrance. The man from the pharmacy was standing there, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing with his free hand, talking urgently to someone. Vincent's instincts flared, the old training kicking in despite the years of rust. Something was happening. Something had changed. He couldn't see the man's expression from this distance, but body language told stories if you knew how to read them. Agitation, purpose, recognition. Vincent's hand tightened on the steering wheel. He should leave. Should find another pharmacy, another store, another town where nobody looked too closely at aging veterans and their service dogs. That's what he'd been doing for 3 years. Running, hiding, avoiding any situation that might require him to explain who he was, what he'd done, why a man with his background was living out of a truck. But Razor needed that medication. And Vincent was tired. Tired of running. Tired of being invisible. Tired of swallowing humiliation like it was just another pill the VA couldn't afford to prescribe. His daughter's face flashed through his mind. Natalie, at 17, trying so hard to be strong. What would she think if she could see him now? Would she understand why he'd left? Would she forgive him? Or would she look at him the same way that manager had, with contempt for a man who'd given up? The phone in the store manager's office started ringing. Vincent couldn't hear it from the parking lot, couldn't know that on the other end was a district supervisor who'd just received a very specific phone call from a very specific person. But he could see the man near the pharmacy still talking, could see other customers beginning to cluster near the entrance. Phones out, attention fixed on something Vincent couldn't quite see. Razor whined again. Vincent looked in the rearview mirror at those steady brown eyes that had never wavered, never judged, never abandoned him even when he'd abandoned everyone else. The dog had earned better than this, had earned respect and dignity and medication when his body started failing. And maybe, just maybe, Vincent had earned the chance to stand up for something again, even if that something was just the right to walk into a store with his dog and be treated like a human being. He shifted the truck back into park, cut the engine, sat there with his hands on the wheel, trying to remember what courage felt like, trying to find some scrap of the man he'd been before Sarah died, before everything fell apart. Razor's nose pressed against his neck, the dog's breath warm and steady and absolutely certain. That's what Vincent had always loved about dogs. They didn't care about your failures. They didn't keep score. They just stayed. Inside the store, the manager's phone rang with a particular tone that meant district office. He picked it up, still riding the satisfaction of enforcing store policy, still picturing the homeless man and his dog retreating through the automatic doors. "Thompson," he answered, voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd just handled a difficult situation perfectly. The voice on the other end was cold enough to freeze water. "What the hell did you just do?" The district supervisor didn't wait for an answer. "I just got a call from corporate." Corporate got a call from someone very interested in why you turn away a military working dog. A decorated military working dog from a combat veteran who was trying to pick up medication. Thompson's confidence flickered. "Sir, I was just enforcing store policy. No animals except certified service dogs." The dog wasn't wearing proper identification, and the man couldn't produce documentation. His voice had shifted already, defensive mechanisms engaging as he sensed the ground shifting beneath him. The supervisor's voice dropped lower. "Dangerous quiet. Did you actually ask to see documentation, Thompson, or did you just assume? Because the man on the phone with corporate right now says you didn't give that veteran a chance to show you anything before you started threatening him with security." Thompson's mouth opened, closed. His mind raced back through the confrontation, tried to remember exactly what he'd said, exactly how it had played out. The old man had reached for his wallet, had started to pull something out, and Thompson had cut him off, told him he didn't need to see anything, that store policy was clear. "I was protecting the store from liability," he managed. "Health codes require us to verify proper certification before allowing animals inside." "You didn't verify anything," the supervisor said. "You made an assumption based on appearance. And now I've got corporate breathing down my neck because apparently that dog has saved more American lives than you've ever met." The line went quiet for a moment. Thompson could hear papers rustling, could picture his supervisor sitting in some office 60 miles away, trying to figure out how to contain this. "I need you to find that man. I need you to apologize. And I need you to make this right before it becomes a PR nightmare. Do you understand me?" Thompson understood. He understood that his comfortable authority had just evaporated, that the homeless-looking man he dismissed so easily was apparently something more, that the dog he'd refused entry had credentials Thompson hadn't bothered to ask about. "Yes, sir," he said. "I'll handle it." He hung up before the supervisor could say anything else, before the sinking feeling in his stomach could get any worse. He walked out of his office on unsteady legs. The store looked different now. The customers who'd witnessed the confrontation were still clustered near the entrance. The teenage employee was talking urgently to an older woman, both of them looking at a phone screen. The man from the pharmacy was nowhere to be seen. Thompson's chest tightened. He pushed through the growing crowd, trying to project authority he no longer felt, try to remember exactly what the old man and his dog looked like, so he could find them in the parking lot. The automatic doors opened and Thompson stepped outside. Morning sun hit him like a spotlight. His eyes scanned the parking lot, looking for the beat-up truck he'd noticed when the old man first arrived. There, far into the lot. Still there. Thompson's relief was immediate and short-lived. Relief that he hadn't lost his chance to apologize. Dread at having to deliver that apology to a man he'd treated with contempt barely 10 minutes ago. He started walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. Around him, the parking lot was filling with morning shoppers, people going about their normal routines, unaware that Thompson's career was potentially circling the drain because he'd been too quick to judge, too confident in his authority. He'd been a store manager for 6 years, had enforced policies hundreds of times, had dealt with difficult customers, with people trying to bend rules, with endless excuses about why someone should be allowed to do something store policy clearly prohibited. But something about this felt different. The supervisor's tone had been sharper than Thompson had ever heard it. The mention of corporate involvement, of someone calling on behalf of the veteran, suggested connections Thompson hadn't anticipated. He'd assumed homeless, assumed down on his luck, assumed someone without resources or advocates, or anyone who cared enough to make phone calls that reached district supervisors within minutes of a confrontation. Thompson reached the truck and stopped. Through the window, he could see the old man sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. The dog's head was visible between the seats, pressed against the man's shoulder. Something about the scene made Thompson's throat tighten. There was intimacy there, a bond that spoke of years and trust and dependence that went both directions. He raised his hand to knock on the window, hesitated, then knocked anyway. 3 sharp raps that made the old man's head turn slowly. Vincent looked at the manager through the truck window and felt every muscle in his body tense. Razor sensed it immediately, pressed harder against his shoulder, low whine building in the dog's chest. Vincent's hand moved to the door handle, stopped. Every instinct screamed at him to start the engine and drive. He'd dealt with managers like this before. They didn't come to apologize. They came to threaten, to intimidate, to make sure the problem stayed gone. But the manager's expression wasn't what Vincent expected. No smak satisfaction, no confident authority. Instead, something closer to panic. The manager gestured at the window, mouthed something Vincent couldn't quite hear. Vincent's hand tightened on the door handle. Razor's whine grew louder. "Easy," Vincent murmured. The dog settled fractionally but stayed tense, reading Vincent's stress through 1,000 tiny signals. Vincent rolled down the window 3 inches. Enough to hear, not enough to feel trapped. Yes. His voice came out flat, emotionless, the tone he'd used with officers who outranked him but hadn't earned his respect. Thompson cleared his throat. "Sir, I need to apologize. I was wrong. I should have asked to see your documentation before making assumptions. I should have given you a chance to explain." The words came out rehearsed, corporate approved, the kind of apology that checked legal boxes without carrying real weight. Vincent stared at him. Behind him, Razor's breathing had gone shallow and quick. The dog knew something was wrong, that this interaction carried threat even if the immediate danger wasn't clear. Vincent's jaw worked, words trying to form and failing. He wanted to scream, wanted to demand why it had taken a phone call from corporate for this man to remember basic human decency. Wanted to ask if homeless veterans only deserved respect after someone important told you to provide it. Instead, he said, "I have documentation. In my wallet. You didn't want to see it." His hand moved to his jacket pocket, pulled out the worn leather wallet he'd tried to show Thompson inside. Hands shaking worse now, rage and humiliation and exhaustion making fine motor control nearly impossible. He extracted a laminated card, handed it through the window gap. Thompson took it. "Read it." His face went pale. The card identified Razor as a retired military working dog, specialty explosives detection, service dates 2011 to 2018, deployments Afghanistan and Iraq, handler Vincent Carver. Below that, a list of commendations that made Thompson's eyes widen. 2 bronze stars, a silver star, 37 confirmed IED detections, 14 lives directly saved through injury alert. The kind of service record that appeared in training manuals and case studies. Thompson's hand started shaking. He'd turned away a dog with more combat experience than most human soldiers ever accumulated. Had threatened to call the police on a handler whose dog had saved American lives while Thompson was comfortable in college, studying business management, never once considering military service. "I didn't know," he said, and hated how weak it sounded. "I should have asked. I should have listened." Vincent took the card back, fingers brushing Thompson's in the exchange. The manager flinched at the contact, at the calluses and scars that marked hands accustomed to violence and survival. "You should have treated us like human beings regardless of what credentials we carried," Vincent said quietly. "The dog doesn't make me worthy of respect. Being a person should be enough." The words landed like physical blows. Thompson felt heat rising in his face, shame mixing with anger at being lectured, at being made to feel small in a parking lot by someone who lived in a truck. But beneath the anger, something else stirred. Recognition that Vincent was right. That Thompson had made judgments based on appearance, had wielded policy like a weapon against someone powerless to fight back, had felt satisfaction in enforcing rules against someone who looked like they couldn't afford to challenge authority. "Sir," Thompson tried again. "Please, come back inside. I'll personally help you find everything you need. The medication for your dog, whatever else you came for. And I'll make sure this never happens again." He could hear the desperation in his own voice, could imagine the follow-up call with his supervisor if Vincent refused, if this turned into something corporate had to keep managing. Vincent looked past Thompson toward the store entrance. More people had gathered there. Phones out, pointed in their direction. The man from the pharmacy was back, standing at the edge of the crowd with arms crossed, watching the interaction with an expression Vincent couldn't quite read. The teenage employee was there too, and the elderly woman with the cane, and a dozen others who'd materialized from somewhere, drawn by whatever story was unfolding. Razor whined again. Vincent's hand found the dog's head automatically, fingers working through the fur with practiced ease. The medication. That's all he'd wanted, all he needed. Just the ability to keep Razor comfortable, to repay in some small measure the years of service, the lives saved, the nights when the dog's presence had been the only thing stopping Vincent from disappearing completely. He looked back at Thompson, saw fear there, saw calculation, saw a man trying to save his job more than trying to make genuine amends. But Vincent was tired of running, tired of accepting humiliation as the price of invisibility. And Razor needed that medication. "Fine," he said. "Let's go." He opened the truck door. Thompson stepped back quickly, giving space. Vincent climbed out, movement stiff, and opened the back door for Razor. The dog jumped down, took position at Vincent's left side, eyes forward and alert. Together, they started walking toward the store entrance. Behind them, Thompson followed, mind already racing through how to spin this, how to minimize damage, how to turn a potential PR disaster into a story about responsive customer service and correcting honest mistakes. What Thompson didn't understand yet was that this wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about store policy or corporate phone calls or damage control. Because the man at the pharmacy had made more than one phone call. And in exactly 3 minutes, someone was going to walk through those automatic doors who would transform this from an awkward confrontation into something far more public. Someone who knew exactly what those patches on Razor's vest meant. Someone who had served alongside handlers like Vincent, who understood what it cost to come home from war only to be treated like trash by people who'd never heard a shot fired in anger. 3 minutes. That's all the time Thompson had left before everything changed. Vincent walked across the parking lot with Razor at his side, and with each step another memory surfaced. Helmand Province. Summer heat that turned metal scorching and made every breath feel like inhaling fire. Razor had been 2 years old, prime of his working life, muscles like coiled springs under that dark coat. They'd been together 8 months by then, long enough that Vincent could read the dog's body language better than most people could read printed words. The mission had been routine. Sweep a road before a convoy moved through. Standard procedure. Razor had alerted 3 times in the first kilometer, each time revealing an IED buried just deep enough to be invisible, positioned perfectly to maximize casualties. Vincent had marked them, called an EOD, watched the disposal team render each device safe. 3 alerts, maybe 15 lives saved. Just another Tuesday in a war zone where death hid in dirt and everyone depended on a dog's nose to tell them where not to step. The 4th device had been different. Razor had stopped, so suddenly Vincent nearly tripped over him. The dog's entire body had gone rigid, tail straight out, one paw lifted in the classic alert position. But something in the way Razor held himself made Vincent's blood run cold. This wasn't the normal alert. This was pure tension, barely controlled panic in an animal trained to stay calm under any circumstances. Vincent had frozen, hand signals telling the team behind him to halt, to stay back, to wait. Razor hadn't moved, hadn't looked back at Vincent, just held that position, trembling with the effort of staying still when every instinct probably screamed at him to run. Vincent had approached slowly, eyes scanning the ground, looking for the telltale signs of disturbed earth, fresh digging, anything that would explain what had made Razor react so strongly. He'd found it 15 feet ahead. Not one device. 3, daisy chained together, set up to create a kill zone that would have taken out half the convoy. The kind of sophisticated setup that suggested Taliban bomb makers were getting better, learning, adapting. Vincent had called it in, had marked the zone, had watched from a safe distance as EOD spent 4 hours carefully dismantling a trap designed to kill as many Americans as possible. The team leader had come over afterward, dusty and exhausted, and shaken Vincent's hand. "Your dog just saved 23 lives," he'd said. Maybe more if one of those trucks had been carrying ammunition. Vincent had looked down at Razor, still sitting perfect and patient, waiting for the reward that made all the stress worthwhile. A tennis ball, 30 seconds of play. That's all it took to make a dog willing to walk into hell. That night, back at the base, Vincent had sat in his quarters with Razor's head in his lap and tried to process what could have happened. 23 lives, men and women with families, with people waiting for them to come home, with futures that would have ended in fire and shrapnel, if not for a 2-year-old Belgian Malinois who'd learned to smell explosives. Vincent had whispered promises into Razor's fur, promises that they'd make it home together, that Vincent would take care of him, that when the war was over and the deployments ended, Razor would never want for anything, would never be abandoned, would get to retire somewhere safe and comfortable. He'd kept those promises. Mostly, they had made it home together. Vincent had adopted Razor the day the dog officially retired from service, paperwork signed before the ink was dry, refusing to let the military reassign the dog to another handler or worse. Put him down because retired military working dogs were considered equipment, not living beings with service records that should have earned them respect. Vincent had brought Razor home to Sarah and Natalie, had set up a bed in the corner of their bedroom, had watched his daughter fall in love with the dog who'd kept her father alive through 3 tours. Those have been good years. Razor had adapted to civilian life better than Vincent had, honestly. The dog learned to relax, to play without the underlying tension of combat readiness, to sleep through nights without jerking awake at every sound. Sarah had loved him, would sit on the floor with her laptop, Razor's head on her knee, absent-mindedly scratching behind his ears while she worked. Natalie had taught him tricks. Roll over, play dead, speak. Silly civilian dog games that seemed ridiculous for an animal with a combat record most soldiers would envy. But Razor had learned them all, patient and willing, adapting to this new life where the greatest danger was forgetting to close the gate to the backyard. Then Sarah got sick. Vincent remembered the day Razor had started acting strange around her. Wouldn't leave her side, would whine and pace when she left the room. Vincent had dismissed it as the dog being clingy, maybe picking up on stress in the household. 3 weeks later, Sarah had gone to the doctor for what she thought was persistent indigestion. The scans had shown stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Inoperable, untreatable beyond palliative care. The doctors had been apologetic but clear. Months at most, probably weeks. Razor had known, had smelled it somehow, the cancer eating through Sarah's body, changing her chemistry in ways human senses couldn't detect. Vincent had read later that dogs could smell cancer, that their noses were sensitive enough to detect cellular changes before any medical equipment could. Razor had been trying to tell them, had been alerting to a threat just like he'd been trained. But this time there was no bomb to dismantle, no danger that could be marked and avoided. Just inevitability. The hospice had allowed Razor to visit. Every day, Vincent would bring him, and the dog would lie beside Sarah's bed with his head on the mattress, brown eyes watching her face with an intensity that broke Vincent's heart. Sarah would run her fingers through his fur and tell stories. Remember when he ate that entire pizza off the counter? Remember when he barked at his own reflection for an hour? Remember when Natalie dressed him up for Halloween and he just stood there looking so patient and dignified despite the ridiculous costume? She died with Razor there, Vincent holding one hand, Natalie holding the other, the dog's nose pressed against her arm. Her last words had been about gratitude. Thank you for keeping him safe. Thank you for bringing him home to us. I love you both so much. Then she closed her eyes, and the monitors had started their terrible flatline song, and Vincent's world had ended while Razor let out a sound Vincent had never heard from him before. Not a bark, not a whine, a howl. Grief in its purest form. After that, everything blurred. The funeral. The well-meaning people saying empty words about time healing and Sarah being in a better place. Natalie trying so hard to be strong, to keep the household running, to take care of her father when she was drowning in her own grief. And Vincent, unable to sleep, unable to work, unable to look at his daughter without seeing Sarah's eyes staring back at him. Razor had tried, had stayed close, had pressed against Vincent during the panic attacks, the nightmares, the nights when Vincent seriously considered whether living was worth the pain of staying alive. But it hadn't been enough. Vincent had looked at Natalie one morning, really looked at her, and seen the exhaustion, the fear, the weight of trying to hold together a family that was disintegrating. She'd been 17, should have been thinking about college, about friends, about normal teenage concerns. Instead, she was parenting her father, managing household bills, trying to keep Vincent from completely falling apart. And Vincent had realized he was destroying her, that his presence, his broken state, was stealing her future just as surely as cancer had stolen Sarah. So he'd left, had written that note, and driven away, and told himself it was the right thing, the merciful thing, to remove himself from Natalie's life before he dragged her down completely. He'd taken Razor because the dog was his responsibility, his promise to keep. He couldn't keep his promise to Sarah about taking care of their daughter. But he could keep his promise to the dog who'd saved 23 lives and deserved better than to be abandoned by the only handler he'd ever trusted. 3 years of living in the truck. 3 years of watching Razor age, seeing the gray creep into his muzzle, feeling the arthritis settle into joints that had run too many miles through too much hell. 3 years of knowing he'd failed everyone, but at least he could keep Razor comfortable. Could make sure the dog, who'd given everything, had medication for the pain, had food and water, and a handler who'd never leave him. That's why the medication mattered so much. Why being turned away from that store had felt like one failure too many. Vincent had broken every promise to the humans in his life. Sarah was dead. Natalie was alone. But Razor was still here, still trusting, still depending on the man who'd promised to take care of him. And if Vincent couldn't even manage to get arthritis medication for a dog who'd earned every comfort the world could provide, then what was the point of anything? Vincent and Razor reached the store entrance. The automatic doors opened with their familiar whoosh. The crowd that had gathered parted, creating a path. Faces stared at them with expressions ranging from curiosity to pity to something that might have been respect. Thompson hovered at Vincent's shoulder, nervous energy radiating from him like heat. The teenage employee had tears in his eyes, phone clutched in one hand. The elderly woman with the cane nodded slowly, approval clear on her weathered face. And at the back of the crowd, the man from the pharmacy stood with his arms still crossed, but now Vincent could see the tattoo on his forearm. An eagle, globe, and anchor. Marinko. The man's eyes locked on Razor's vest, on the patches that were fully visible now in the bright store lighting. His jaw was set. His phone was in his hand. And Vincent suddenly understood that whatever was about to happen, this Marine had set it in motion, had made calls to people who made other calls, had decided that a dog like Razor and a handler like Vincent deserved something better than being thrown out of a grocery store. Vincent's throat tightened. Razor pressed against his leg. And somewhere outside, barely 2 minutes away, a car was pulling into the parking lot. Inside that car was someone who knew exactly what those patches meant, who had served in the same communities, who understood what it cost to be a handler and what it meant when civilians treated veterans like garbage. Someone who was about to make Thompson's very bad day considerably worse. Vincent walked through the automatic doors with Razor at his side and immediately felt the weight of every eye in the store. The crowd that had gathered near the entrance didn't disperse. Instead, they followed at a respectful distance, phones out, capturing whatever was unfolding. Thompson stayed close, too close, his anxiety a palpable presence that made Vincent's skin crawl. The manager kept trying to make conversation, kept offering help Vincent hadn't asked for, kept apologizing in ways that felt more about covering his own liability than genuine remorse. The pharmacy was at the back of the store. Vincent headed there with single-minded purpose, Razor matching his pace perfectly. Other shoppers stopped mid-aisle, carts forgotten, watching the procession. A woman with a toddler in her cart noticed Razor's vest, and her expression shifted from curiosity to something closer to awe. She touched her chest, right over her heart, a gesture of respect Vincent hadn't seen directed at him in years. It made his throat tight. The Marine from earlier stood near the pharmacy counter, arms still crossed, but his posture had changed. Less observation, more anticipation. As Vincent approached, the man straightened to attention. Not the exaggerated stiffness of someone playing soldier, but the real thing, muscle memory from years of service. "Sir," the man said. His voice carried across the pharmacy department, clear and formal. His eyes went to Razor, to the patches now fully visible on the dog's vest, and something in his expression cracked. "That's a K9 unit patch from 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force. Afghanistan deploiement." Vincent stopped, looked at the man properly for the first time. Early 30s. Fit. The kind of build that came from discipline, not vanity. The eagle, globe, and anchor tattoo on his forearm was faded enough to be old, detailed enough to be meaningful. "You served," Vincent said. Not a question. 3 tours. The man's jaw worked. "Infantry. We had handlers embedded with us in Helmand Province. 2012 deployment. I watched what those dogs did, what their handlers did." He looked at Thompson, who'd gone pale and silent. "I saw a dog take down a suicide bomber 20 feet from our position. Saw another one alert to an IED that would have killed 8 Marines. And I watched handlers put themselves between their dogs and enemy fire because those animals were worth more than equipment. They were brothers." The pharmacy around them had gone completely silent. Even the distant beeping of registers at the front of the store seemed muted. Vincent's hand tightened on Razor's vest. The dog looked up at him, brown eyes steady and trusting. 3 years of living rough hadn't changed that trust. Hadn't made Razor look at him with anything but loyalty Vincent knew he didn't deserve. The Marine wasn't finished. "So when I saw you getting thrown out of this store, when I saw that vest and recognized what it meant, I made some calls. My sister works at the VA. She has connections. She called people who called other people." He glanced at his phone. "And someone should be arriving right about now who's very interested in why a retired military working dog was denied entry to a civilian establishment." Thompson made a sound that might have been protest or might have been the beginning of a panic attack. Vincent felt something twist in his chest. He didn't want this. Didn't want attention or vindication or someone riding to his rescue like he was helpless. He just wanted the medication. Wanted to disappear back into invisibility where the weight of other people's expectations couldn't find him. But before he could say anything, before he could tell the Marine that it was fine, it was handled. Thompson had apologized, and Vincent just needed to get what he came for and leave. The automatic doors at the front of the store whooshed open. The sound carried in the unnatural quiet. Footsteps followed, purposeful, measured, military cadence that Vincent recognized in his bones. The crowd near the entrance shifted, parting. Through the gap walked a woman in her early 50s, wearing a jacket that bore patches Vincent recognized immediately. Veterans Affairs, but not standard VA staff. The patches indicated something higher. Regional director level. Behind her walked two younger people, a man and a woman, both carrying tablets and wearing expressions of professional concern that suggested they were here to document whatever happened next. The woman's eyes swept the store, cataloging everything in seconds, then locked on Vincent and Razor. She started walking toward them, heels clicking on the linoleum. The crowd followed her movement like spectators at a tennis match, heads turning in unison. Thompson looked like he might vomit. The Marine stood taller, satisfaction clear on his face. Vincent wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to grab Razor and bolt for the exit, to get in his truck and drive until this moment was miles behind them. But Razor needed the medication, and Vincent was tired of running, tired of being ashamed, tired of accepting humiliation as the price of survival. The woman stopped 3 feet away, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough to be respectful of personal space. Her eyes went to Razor first, studying the vest with the practiced assessment of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. Then to Vincent, taking in his worn clothes, his weathered face, his shaking hands. Her expression softened. "Mr. Carver," she said, "my name is Patricia Reyes. I'm the Regional Director for Veterans Affairs. I received a call about 30 minutes ago regarding a situation involving you and your military working dog." Vincent's voice came out hoarse. "Ma'am, I don't want to cause trouble. I just need medication for my dog. He has arthritis. This pharmacy carries a specific brand that works best for him." His hands were shaking worse now. Humiliation and exhaustion and the sheer effort of remaining standing, making fine motor control nearly impossible. Patricia's eyes never left his face. "I understand, and I'm very sorry that accessing basic health care for your service dog required intervention from my office." She turned to Thompson. The manager had gone from pale to gray, sweat visible on his forehead. "Are you the individual who denied this veteran and his dog entry to this establishment?" Thompson nodded. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Yes, but I've apologized. I didn't know. I thought it was just someone trying to bring a pet inside, and I was enforcing store policy." His words tumbled over each other, desperation making him verbose where earlier he'd been confidently dismissive. Patricia's expression didn't change. "Did you ask to see documentation before making that decision? Did you give Mr. Carver an opportunity to explain? Or did you make an assumption based on appearance?" The silence stretched. Thompson opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I made an assumption," he finally admitted. "I was wrong." "Yes," Patricia said. "You were." She looked down at Razor, who sat perfectly at Vincent's side, eyes forward, the picture of discipline despite the chaos around him. "This dog has a service record that includes 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and 37 confirmed IED detections. He saved American lives while risking his own. And you try to have him removed from a public space because he didn't meet your visual standards for what a hero should look like." Thompson's face flushed red. "I didn't know about his service record. I couldn't have known without seeing documentation." "Which you refused to look at," Patricia said. Her voice remained level, professional, but steel ran underneath every word. "Mr. Carver attempted to show you credentials. You told him you didn't need to see anything. You made a judgment based purely on appearance, on your assumption that someone dressed like Mr. Carver couldn't possibly have legitimate business in your store." Around them, the crowd had grown. Store employees had abandoned their posts. Customers had stopped shopping. Phones were everywhere, recording every word. Vincent felt trapped, exposed, like every failure and humiliation of the past 3 years was on display for an audience he'd never wanted. His breathing quickened. Razor pressed harder against his leg, solid and grounding. Patricia must have noticed his distress because her tone gentled when she spoke again. "Mr. Carver, I need to ask you some questions. Is that all right?" Vincent nodded, not trusting his voice. When did you last receive services from a VA? 2 years ago, Vincent managed. Maybe 3. I missed appointments. Stop going. The admission felt like peeling off skin, exposing wounds he'd tried to keep hidden. Why? Patricia's question was direct, but not unkind. Vincent's eyes burned. Because I couldn't handle the paperwork. Because I couldn't sit in waiting rooms without having panic attacks. Because every time I went, they treated me like a number instead of a person, and I'd rather suffer alone than feel like a burden to a system that didn't want me anyway. The words came out harsher than he'd intended, raw and honest in a way that left him feeling skinned. Patricia nodded slowly. I understand. The VA system has failed you. It fails too many veterans. And then you come to a civilian establishment seeking basic care for your service dog, and you're treated like this. She gestured at Thompson, at the store, at the situation that had spiraled so far beyond a simple medication pickup. This is unacceptable. She pulled out a tablet from the bag one of her assistants carried. Started typing. Mr. Carver, I'm going to get you reconnected with services. Real services, not bureaucratic runaround. You and Razor both deserve comprehensive care. But first, let's handle why you're here. She looked at Thompson. This store will provide Mr. Carver with whatever medication his dog requires. At no cost. Consider it compensation for the distress you've caused. Thompson's mouth fell open. Ma'am, I don't have the authority to authorize that kind of discount without corporate approval. Patricia's smile was sharp enough to cut. Then I suggest you call corporate. Again, and explain that the alternative is a very public story about how your store discriminates against combat veterans and decorated military working dogs. I have 3 news outlets on speed dial who would love to cover this. Your choice. Thompson pulled out his phone with shaking hands. Started dialing. Around them, the crowd murmured, some voices angry, some sympathetic, all of them engaged in a drama that had transformed from routine confrontation into something far more significant. Vincent stood at the center of it, hand on Razor's head, and felt the world pressing in from all sides. He'd wanted invisibility. Instead, he'd gotten a spotlight that revealed every crack, every failure, every piece of himself he'd tried so hard to hide. Patricia was still talking, explaining programs and services and opportunities, but Vincent could barely hear her over the roaring in his ears. Razor whined, low and concerned. The dog knew, always knew. Vincent's legs felt unsteady. His vision narrowed at the edges. The panic attack he'd been fighting since walking back through those doors was winning, and there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, no way to escape the terrible exposure of being seen. Vincent's vision tunneled. The pharmacy around him blurred into indistinct shapes and colors. Voices became distant, muffled, like he was underwater. His chest tightened with the familiar sensation of walls closing in, air thinning, the world contracting to a point of unbearable pressure. He'd had panic attacks before, hundreds of them over the past 3 years, but never in public, never with an audience. Never with phones recording his breakdown for strangers to witness and judge. Razor moved, not the controlled precision of a service alert, but urgent instinct. The dog pressed his full weight against Vincent's legs, forcing him to focus on staying upright, on the solid warmth of living muscle and fur. Vincent's hand found Razor's vest automatically, fingers closing on the handle with desperate strength. The dog stood firm, bracing against Vincent's weight, providing an anchor point when everything else felt like it was spinning away. Breathe, a voice said. Close. Calm. Not Patricia's professional concern, but someone else. Vincent forced his eyes to focus. The Marine had moved closer, positioned himself between Vincent and the crowd, body language shifting to protective, creating space, blocking sight lines, in through your nose, out through your mouth. The man's voice was steady, practiced, like he'd talked people through this before. You're okay. You're safe. Just breathe. Vincent tried, dragged air into lungs that felt too small, too tight. His free hand was shaking so badly he couldn't control it. The medication bottle he'd been holding clattered to the floor, pills scattering across linoleum. The sound was too loud, too sharp. Vincent flinched, muscles tensing for impact that didn't come. Razor whined and pushed harder against him. Weight and warmth and unconditional presence. Patricia had stepped back, giving space, but her voice carried clear instructions to her assistants. Clear the area. Give him room. No more phones. Anyone recording this needs to stop right now. There was authority in her tone that brooked no argument. The crowd shifted, some people putting phones away, others reluctantly stepping back. But they didn't leave. The spectacle was too compelling. The broken veteran in the middle of a pharmacy, held upright only by a dog who refused to let him fall. The teenage employee who'd been watching earlier pushed through the crowd. He carried a folding chair. The kind stores kept in back rooms for employees on break. He set it down behind Vincent without a word, then stepped back. Vincent felt hands on his shoulders, gentle pressure guiding him down. He sat because his legs wouldn't hold him anymore, because the alternative was collapsing completely. Razor immediately shifted position, head in Vincent's lap, brown eyes locked on his face with unwavering focus. "You're doing good," the Marine said. He'd crouched down to Vincent's level, maintaining eye contact without crowding. "What's your name?" "Real name, not what's on paperwork." "Vincent," he managed, voice barely above a whisper. "Vincent," the Marine repeated. "I'm Kyle. I'm going to stay right here with you until you're ready. No ruse, no pressure, just breathe." He glanced at Razor. "Your dog's got you. He's not going anywhere." Vincent's fingers worked through Razor's fur, the familiar texture grounding him incrementally. The dog's breathing was steady, calm, a metronome Vincent could match. In and out, slowly, agonizingly slowly, the edges of his vision started to clear. The pressure in his chest eased fractionally. He could hear individual voices again instead of just overwhelming noise. Thompson was still on the phone with corporate, voice high and strained. Patricia stood nearby, tablet in hand, typing rapidly while maintaining awareness of Vincent's condition. Her assistants had created a perimeter, politely but firmly asking people to give space, to move along, to respect privacy. Some complied. Others lingered, curiosity stronger than empathy. Kyle stayed crouched beside Vincent, patient and steady. After several minutes of silence, broken only by Vincent's ragged breathing and Razor's concerned whines, he spoke again. "I had a buddy, dog named Ajax, German Shepherd, smart as hell, mean as a snake to anyone who wasn't his handler. Saved our entire squad in Sanjin. IED big enough to take out an MRAP. Ajax alerted 30 seconds before we would have driven right over it." Vincent's breathing steadied further. He knew where this was going, knew the shape of the story before Kyle said another word. "Ajax made it home," Kyle continued. "My buddy didn't. Sniper round. 2 weeks before we were supposed to rotate back stateside." His voice stayed level, but pain ran underneath like a river. "Ajax waited at the base gate every day for a month, looking for him. We tried to tell the dog he wasn't coming back, but how do you explain death to an animal who only understands loyalty?" "What happened to Ajax?" Vincent asked. His voice was stronger now, grounded by shared understanding of loss. "Ended up with another handler eventually," Kyle said. "But he was never the same. Dogs grieve too. People forget that. They think because animals can't talk, they don't feel. But I watched Ajax mourn, and it was as real as anything I've ever seen." He looked at Razor. "Your dog knows what you've lost, knows what you're carrying, and he's still here." Vincent's throat closed again, but different this time. Not panic, but grief, the kind that lived so deep it had become part of his foundation. "He's all I have left," Vincent whispered. "The admission cost him everything. Everyone else, I drove away. My daughter, my family, everyone who tried to help. But Razor stayed, even when I didn't deserve it." Kyle's expression softened. "Dogs don't care about deserve. They just love. It's the best thing about them and the worst thing about us. We spend so much time worrying about whether we're worthy when they've already decided we are." He stood slowly, offered his hand. "You ready to stand?" Vincent looked down at Razor. The dog's tail wagged once, encouraging. Vincent took Kyle's hand and pulled himself up. His legs were steadier now. the worst of the panic attack receding into familiar exhaustion. "Thank you," he said. Kyle shrugged. "We take care of our own. That's what we do." He gestured toward Patricia, who was watching with the patience of someone accustomed to waiting for veterans to be ready. "She's one of the good ones. Actually gives a damn. You should listen to what she has to say." Patricia approached carefully, giving Vincent time to adjust to her proximity. "Mr. Carver, how are you feeling? Can we continue talking? Or do you need more time?" Vincent straightened his shoulders, muscle memory from decades of military bearing asserting itself despite his worn appearance. "Imokiai, Mung. I apologize for the disruption." Her eyes flashed. Don't apologize for having a human reaction to an inhumane situation. You were treated with disrespect and discrimination. Your response is valid." She pulled up information on her tablet. "I've been reviewing your file. You were honorably discharged in 2018 after 12 years of service. Multiple deployments. Commendations for valor. Handler specialty with documented success rate in IED detection that puts you in the top percentile of your field." Vincent nodded. "That was a different person, ma'am. I'm not him anymore." Patricia's gaze was steady. "You're a veteran experiencing trauma and grief who has been systematically failed by the support systems designed to help you. That doesn't erase who you were or what you accomplished." She tapped her tablet. "I'm setting up a care coordination meeting for next week. Full medical assessment for you. Full veterinary assessment for Razor. Housing assistance. Employment resources if you're interested. All of it coordinated through my office directly, not the standard VA channels that failed you." Vincent wanted to refuse. Wanted to say he didn't need charity, didn't deserve help, that he'd made his choices and should live with them. But Razor shifted against his leg, arthritis making the movement stiff, reminding Vincent that this wasn't just about him. The dog deserved better, deserved the care and comfort Vincent had promised years ago. "Okay," Vincent said. The word felt like surrender and relief in equal measure. Thompson returned, phone still in his hand, face ashen. "Corporate has approved full compensation for the medication, and they want me to extend formal apologies on behalf of the company." He looked like he wanted to say more, wanted to defend himself or explain or somehow make this better. But Patricia's presence seemed to steal whatever words he'd prepared. "The medication," Patricia said. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Thompson nodded quickly. Right away, he hurried to the pharmacy counter, spoke urgently to the pharmacist who'd been watching everything unfold with wide eyes. Within moments, a bag was being prepared, prescription bottles and instructions being gathered with hands that moved just slightly too fast, revealing nerves. Khaled stepped back but remained close, arms crossed, watching. Other veterans in the crowd had identified themselves through subtle signals. A nod, a particular way of standing, shared understanding of what it meant to watch one of their own struggle. They formed an unconscious perimeter, protective without being obvious about it. The elderly woman with the cane from earlier had made her way closer. She caught Vincent's eye and smiled, genuine warmth in her weathered face. "My husband was a handler in Vietnam," she said. "Dog saved his life more than once. I'm glad someone finally stood up for you." She reached out and squeezed Vincent's hand briefly before moving on, leaving him with the gift of acknowledgement from someone who understood. Vincent's chest felt too full. All these people, these strangers, treating him with more kindness in 30 minutes than he'd experienced in 3 years. It was overwhelming and humbling and terrifying because kindness required vulnerability, required accepting that maybe he wasn't beyond help, that maybe giving up and disappearing hadn't been the only option. Thompson returned with the medication bag. His hand shook as he offered it to Vincent. "I'm sorry," he said again. The words sounded more genuine now, stripped of the earlier calculation. "I was wrong. About everything." Vincent took the bag, looked at Thompson properly for the first time since entering the store, saw a man who'd made a mistake, who'd wielded power without consideration, who was learning consequences in real time. "We all make mistakes," Vincent said quietly. "What matters is what you do after." The words hung in the air. Thompson nodded, blinking rapidly. Vincent turned to Patricia. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, "you and Razor go home. Rest. And next week, we start putting your life back together. One piece at a time. Vincent walked toward the exit with Razor at his side and the medication bag clutched in his hand. Patricia walked with them, still typing on her tablet, making arrangements Vincent couldn't quite process through the exhaustion settling into his bones. Kyle followed at a respectful distance, silent guardian making sure they made it out safely. Behind them, the crowd had finally begun to disperse, though Vincent could feel eyes tracking his movement, could sense phones still recording despite Patricia's earlier instructions. The automatic doors opened. Cool air hit Vincent's face, sharp and grounding after the recycled atmosphere inside. He stopped just outside, suddenly uncertain. Patricia had said next week, had talked about care coordination and housing assistance and rebuilding his life. But Vincent had spent 3 years learning not to trust promises, not to hope for things that could be taken away. The medication in his hand was real, tangible. Everything else felt like smoke. Mr. Carver, Patricia said. She'd stopped beside him, patient despite what must be a schedule full of more important things than babysitting a broken veteran in a parking lot. I know this is overwhelming. I know you have every reason not to trust the system or the people claiming they want to help. Her voice was gentle but firm. But I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. This isn't pity. This is what should have been available to you from the moment you came home. You earned this support through your service. You and Razor both. Vincent's jaw worked. He wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that maybe, possibly, there was a path forward that didn't involve living in his truck and avoiding human connection. But belief required vulnerability, and vulnerability had cost him everything he'd ever loved. Ma'am, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I've been to the VA before. I've filled out the forms and sat in the waiting rooms and talked to people who looked at me like I was wasting their time. His voice stayed level through sheer force of will. Why would this time be different? Patricia met his eyes without flinching. Because this time, you're not navigating it alone. This time you have someone who knows how to fight the bureaucracy, who has the authority to cut through red tape, who'll make sure you don't fall through the cracks again. She pulled a business card from her pocket, held it out. This is my direct line, not a general office number, not a hotline. Me. If you run into problems, if you need help, if you just need someone to talk to at 3 in the morning when the nightmares get bad, you call that number. Vincent took the card with shaking fingers. The weight of it felt disproportionate to the small rectangle of paper. He tucked it carefully into his wallet, next to Razor's documentation, next to the photo of Natalie he couldn't bear to look at, but couldn't throw away. Thank you, he managed. One more thing, Patricia said. She pulled up something on her tablet, turned it so Vincent could see. The screen showed a program description. Veteran reintegration housing. Not shelters. Not temporary placements. Actual apartments designated for veterans, with support services on-site, pet-friendly with special accommodation for service animals. There's a unit available now. Furnished. Utilities included for the first 6 months. All you have to do is say yes. Vincent stared at the screen. Read the words without comprehending them. An apartment. A real place to live. Walls and a door that locked and space for Razor to stretch out without being cramped in the back of a truck. It seemed impossible. Too good. The kind of thing that came with strings attached, with expectations Vincent couldn't meet, with inevitable failure when he proved himself incapable of maintaining normal life. Razor pressed against his leg. The dog's weight was solid, real, uncomplicated in its constancy. Vincent looked down at those brown eyes that had seen him at his worst and never wavered. What would Razor's life look like in an actual apartment? No more sleeping in parking lots. No more winter nights when the truck's heater couldn't quite keep the cold at bay. Room to move. Comfort. The things Vincent had promised all those years ago when he'd sworn to take care of the dog who'd saved so many lives. How long do I have to decide? Vincent asked. Patricia smiled. The unit's yours if you want it. Today, next week, next month. Whenever you're ready. But Mr. Carver, I hope you'll consider that being ready might mean being willing to try even when you're scared. The words hit harder than they should have. Vincent had spent 3 years avoiding anything that required courage, anything that meant risking failure or disappointing people or proving that he was as broken as he felt. Running had seemed like the safest option. But safe had also meant alone. Had meant watching Razor age in the back of a truck. Had meant medication runs turning into humiliating confrontations because Vincent was too afraid to ask for the help he'd earned. Kyle approached, footsteps deliberate enough to announce his presence. "You got somewhere to go tonight?" he asked. "Somewhere safe." Vincent gestured vaguely toward his truck. "Same place as always." Kyle nodded slowly. "Patricia told me about the housing unit. You should take it." His voice carried the weight of experience, of someone who'd maybe walked a similar path. "I lived in my car for 8 months after I got out. Told myself I was fine, that I didn't need help, that accepting support meant admitting I couldn't handle things on my own." He crossed his arms. "Took my sister dragging me to the VA by force before I finally got into housing. Saved my life. Literally. I don't think I would have made it through another winter." Vincent studied Kyle's face. Saw someone who'd survived something similar, who'd made it to the other side. "What changed?" he asked. "What made you decide to accept help?" Kyle's expression turned distant. "I watched a dog freeze to death in a parking lot. Stray that had been hanging around where I was staying. I tried to get it to come in the car with me, but it wouldn't trust me. Next morning, it was just gone. Frozen. And I realized that's what I was doing to myself. Refusing help because I didn't trust it, even though staying alone was literally killing me." He refocused on Vincent. "Your dog trusts you. Maybe trust him back. If Razor thinks you're worth saving, maybe you are." The simplicity of the logic made Vincent's chest tight. Razor had followed him into hell, had stayed through 3 years of living rough, had never looked at Vincent with anything but trust and loyalty. If the dog thought Vincent was worth the effort, worth staying with, maybe there was something there worth preserving. "I'll think about it," Vincent said. It was the most he could commit to, the furthest he could stretch toward hope without breaking. Patricia seemed to understand. "That's enough for now." She handed him another card, this one with an address. "That's where the housing office is. When you're ready." Her assistants had emerged from the store, carrying clipboards and looking satisfied with whatever documentation they completed. "We need to go. But Mr. Carver, I'll call you tomorrow, just to check in. You don't have to answer if you're not ready, but I'll keep calling until you are." Vincent nodded. Watched Patricia and her team walk to their vehicle, professional and purposeful, and somehow making him believe that maybe she actually gave a damn. Kyle lingered, hands in pockets, clearly debating whether to say more. "You got my number too," Kyle said finally. Patricia made sure of it. "Added it to your phone while you were dealing with the panic attack." He shrugged at Vincent's surprised expression. "She's thorough. Point is, you need anything you call. Day or night. You need someone to talk to, someone to help you move if you decide to take that apartment, someone to just sit with you when the nights get bad. Whatever. We take care of our own." "Why?" Vincent asked. The question came out harsher than intended. "You don't know me. Don't know me anything. Why do you care?" Kyle's smile was sad. "Because someone cared enough to pull me out when I was drowning. Because watching another veteran struggle when I could help makes me complicit in a system that's already failed too many of us. Because your dog deserves a handler who's getting the support he needs. Take your pick." Vincent looked at Razor. The dog sat patient and perfect, waiting for whatever came next with absolute trust that Vincent would make the right choice. The weight of that trust was crushing and motivating in equal measure. "Okay," Vincent said. "I'll call. Maybe. If I need to." "Good enough," Kyle said. He offered his hand. Vincent shook it, feeling the calluses that marked someone who'd worked with their hands, who understood physical labor and sacrifice. Then Kyle walked away, back toward the store entrance where other veterans still lingered, their impromptu protective circle dissolving now that the immediate crisis had passed. Vincent stood alone in the parking lot with Razor and a bag of medication and 2 business cards that felt like lifelines he wasn't sure he deserved to grab. The sun was higher now, morning advancing toward afternoon. His truck waited at the far end of the lot, familiar and confining and safe in its predictability. The apartment Patricia had described existed somewhere else, unknown and terrifying and full of possibility that Vincent didn't trust himself to handle. He could walk to his truck right now, could drive away, could forget about housing units and care coordination and people who claimed they wanted to help. could return to the invisible existence he'd carved out over 3 years, where expectations were low and disappointment was impossible because he'd already lost everything worth losing. Or he could try, could show up to that housing office, could call Patricia's number, could risk hoping that maybe, possibly, there was still a version of his life that didn't involve running and hiding and slowly disappearing into nothing. Razor whined softly. The sound pulled Vincent from his spiral. He looked down at his dog, at the gray in his muzzle and the stiffness in his movements and the unwavering trust in those brown eyes. The dog had earned better, had earned comfort and care and a handler who tried, even when trying felt impossible. Vincent pulled out his phone, looked at the contacts Patricia had added without his permission. Her number was there. So was Kyle's. So was a hotline for veteran crisis support and the housing office information and half a dozen other resources he'd been too proud or too ashamed to seek out on his own. His thumb hovered over Patricia's contact. One call. That's all it would take to start the process. To accept help. To admit that he couldn't do this alone anymore. That 3 years of trying to handle everything by himself had led exactly nowhere except deeper into isolation and despair. Razor leaned against his leg. The pressure was grounding. Familiar. The same steadiness the dog had provided through firefights and losses and the worst nights of Vincent's life. The dog had never given up on him. Maybe it was time Vincent stopped giving up on himself. He pressed dial. Patricia answered on the second ring. Mr. Carver. Her voice carried surprise and something that might have been relief. I didn't expect to hear from you this quickly. Vincent's throat closed around the words he'd planned to say. His thumb moved toward the end call button, instinct screaming at him to retreat before he committed to something he'd inevitably fail. But Razor was watching him with those steady eyes, and the medication bag in his other hand reminded him why he'd walked into that store in the first place. Ma'am, he managed. The apartment. I like to see it, if the offer's still available. The pause on the other end lasted barely a heartbeat. Of course it's available. Are you free now? I can meet you there in 20 minutes. Now felt too soon, too fast, like being pushed toward a cliff edge without time to prepare. But Vincent had learned that preparation was just another word for finding reasons to back out. 20 minutes is fine, he said. Where do I go? Patricia gave him an address. Vincent recognized the area, a neighborhood he'd driven through occasionally, lower middle class, but maintained, the kind of place where people took care of their small yards and knew their neighbors. Not the desperate poverty Vincent had imagined for veteran housing. Not warehoused, broken soldiers in institutional buildings that smelled like failure. Just normal apartments where normal people lived normal lives. He ended the call and stood in the parking lot, commitment made, path forward suddenly real and terrifying. Razor stood and shook, the movement stiff but purposeful, ready to go wherever Vincent led. The dog's faith was absolute. Vincent wished he could borrow some of it, could believe with Razor's certainty that things would work out simply because they decided to try. The drive took 15 minutes. Vincent's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, anxiety building with every mile that brought him closer to possibility he didn't trust himself to handle. The truck's engine rattled worse than usual, protesting the longer drive. Vincent made mental calculations he'd been avoiding for weeks. The truck wouldn't last much longer. Another month, maybe. Possibly 2, if he was lucky. Then he'd be on foot with a dog who had arthritis and a life's possessions that barely filled 2 duffel bags. The apartment complex appeared on his right, exactly where Patricia had said. 2-story buildings arranged around a central courtyard, trees providing shade, a small playground visible in the distance. Cars in the parking lot were mostly older models, practical vehicles maintained with care rather than money. Not affluence, but not destitution either. The kind of place where people worked hard and got by, and maybe had enough left over to help a neighbor occasionally. Vincent pulled into a visitor spot, killed the engine, sat with his hands still gripping the steering wheel while Razor waited patiently in the back seat. Through the windshield, Vincent could see Patricia's vehicle already parked near the main office. She stood outside, tablet in hand, talking on her phone. Even from this distance, Her body language communicated competence and purpose. She'd said she would help. Apparently, she'd meant it. Vincent opened the truck door and climbed out. Let Razor out of the back seat. The dog immediately took position at his left side, eyes scanning the new environment with interest but no alarm. They walked toward Patricia together, Vincent's boots scuffing on pavement that had been recently sealed, evidence of maintenance and care. Patricia ended her call as they approached. Mr. Carver. She gestured toward one of the buildings. Units on the first floor. Ground-level access, which I thought would be better for Razor, given his arthritis. No stairs to navigate. Her tone was matter-of-fact, no condescension, just practical consideration. They walked to the building together. Patricia produced a key from her pocket, opened the main entrance, led Vincent down a hallway that smelled like fresh paint and cleaning products rather than decay or desperation. She stopped at a door marked 1C. This is it, she said. Unlocked it. Stepped aside to let Vincent enter first. He walked through the doorway and stopped. The apartment was small. Efficiency style with a combined living space and kitchenette. A separate bedroom visible through an open door, a bathroom he could see from the entrance. But it was clean, recently renovated from the look of the paint and flooring. Furnished with basic but functional pieces. A couch that had seen use but wasn't falling apart. A small dining table with 2 chairs. A bed visible in the bedroom. Windows that let in natural light and looked out onto the courtyard. Razor walked past Vincent, exploring with the careful precision of a dog assessing new territory. He sniffed corners and doorways, tail wagging slowly. When he reached the bedroom, he stopped in the doorway and looked back at Vincent. The expression on the dog's face was as close to approval as an animal could communicate. Patricia moved to the kitchenette, opened cabinets to show basic dishes and cookware. Utilities are covered for 6 months, she said. After that, you'd pay a reduced rate based on income. Lease is month to month initially. No long-term commitment if it doesn't work out. But the goal is stability, Mr. Carver. A place you can stay as long as you need. Vincent walked further into the space, ran his hand along the back of the couch, opened the refrigerator to find it empty but clean and working, looked at the bedroom where Razor had already claimed a spot of floor near the window, settled into a sphinx position with a contentment Vincent hadn't seen in the dog for months. This is too much, Vincent said. His voice came out rough. I can't afford this. Can barely afford gas for the truck most weeks. You're not paying market rate, Patricia explained. This is subsidized housing specifically for veterans. Your rent would be based on whatever income you have now, which I'm guessing is minimal to none. She pulled up information on her tablet. Until we get you connected with employment or disability benefits, whichever route makes sense for you, you'd pay $50 a month. That's it. Utilities included. $50. Less than Vincent spent on gas in a week when he was driving regularly. Less than a single visit to a regular doctor would cost without insurance. It seemed impossible, the kind of too-good offer that came with catches he wasn't seeing. What's the catch? He asked. What happens when I can't keep up with expectations? When I have a bad week and can't handle the check-ins or the meetings or whatever requirements come with this? Patricia set down her tablet, looked at Vincent with an expression he couldn't quite read. The catch, Mr. Carver, is that you have to try. That's all. You have to show up to medical appointments we schedule. You have to meet with the caseworker once a week, at least initially. You have to accept that getting better isn't something you can do alone. Her voice gentled, but having a bad week isn't failure. Missing an appointment because you're having a panic attack isn't grounds for eviction. This program understands trauma, understands that healing isn't linear. We work with you, not against you. Vincent's eyes burned. He turned away, pretending to examine the view from the window. The courtyard outside held a few residents. An older man walking a small dog. A woman hanging laundry on a balcony despite having access to the community laundry room. Normal people living normal lives. Vincent couldn't remember what normal felt like anymore. Couldn't imagine himself fitting into this scene of mundane domesticity. But Razor was still lying on the bedroom floor, completely relaxed in a way the truck's cramped back seat never allowed. The dog had earned this. had earned space and comfort and a handler who tried to give him the retirement he deserved. Vincent could fail at this, probably would fail at some point, but maybe the trying mattered more than the succeeding. Maybe showing up mattered, even when showing up felt impossible. "I'll take it," Vincent said. The words felt like jumping off a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Patricia smiled. "Good. I'll start the paperwork. You can move in today if you want. Keys are yours." She pulled out another set from her pocket, handed them to Vincent. The weight of them was substantial, metal warm from her hand. She'd been carrying them this whole time. Had believed enough in the possibility of Vincent saying yes that she'd come prepared with keys already cut. Vincent closed his fingers around the metal, felt the grooves of the teeth, the solid reality of access and belonging. He had a place now, an address, for walls and a door that locked and space for Razor to stretch out. It wasn't home. Not yet. Maybe never would be, given how thoroughly Vincent had destroyed his understanding of what home meant. But it was shelter. It was possibility. It was one small step away from the edge he'd been teetering on for 3 years. "There's a pet supply store 2 blocks from here," Patricia said. "I took the liberty of setting up an account. You can get food for Razor, bowls, a bed if you want one. It's covered through the program for the first month. After that, we'll work out a budget that makes sense." Vincent nodded, not trusting his voice. Too much kindness landing all at once, threatening to crack the armor he'd built around himself. Patricia seemed to understand. She gave him space, busied herself with her tablet, let him process without demanding response. Razor stood and walked over to Vincent, leaned against his leg with familiar weight. The dog looked up at him with those steady brown eyes that had seen Vincent at his absolute worst and chosen to stay anyway. Vincent's hand found Razor's head automatically, fingers working through the familiar fur. "We have a place," he told the dog quietly. "Maybe we'll be okay." The future stretched ahead, uncertain and full of opportunities to fail. Medical appointments Vincent might miss. Caseworker meetings he might not be able to handle. Nights when the walls closed in and the apartment felt like a trap rather than shelter. All the ways things could go wrong crowded Vincent's mind. Familiar anxiety, trying to convince him he'd made a mistake, that he should leave now before he disappointed everyone who decided to invest in his recovery. But Razor's tail wagged, slow and steady in content. The dog had never led Vincent wrong before, had saved his life more times than Vincent could count. Maybe it was time to trust Razor's judgment one more time. Time to stay instead of run. Time to try instead of give up. Time to believe that maybe, possibly against all odds and past evidence, things could actually get better. Patricia looked up from her tablet. "I have a caseworker I want you to meet. Her name is Jennifer. She specializes in working with combat veterans, particularly those with canine experience. She understands a bond, understands what it means to lose that structure. I'd like to set up an initial meeting for tomorrow, if you're willing." Tomorrow felt too soon. Vincent wanted to say no, wanted to ask for time to adjust before adding more people and expectations to his already overwhelming day. But he'd said he would try. Trying meant accepting help even when it felt like too much too fast. "Okay," he said. "Tomorrow." The word felt like victory and surrender at once. Vincent spent his first night in the apartment staring at the ceiling. The bed was too soft after years of sleeping in the truck's passenger seat or on the ground when he couldn't afford gas to run the heater. The silence was too complete. No traffic sounds or other homeless people moving through parking lots. No constant low-level threat that required staying partially alert even while sleeping. Razor had claimed the floor beside the bed, stretched out on carpet instead of metal truck bed, snoring softly in a way that suggested the dog had no such adjustment problems. Around 3 in the morning, Vincent gave up on sleep. He got up carefully, trying not to disturb Razor, and walked to the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed quietly, a normal sound in a normal apartment where normal people lived normal lives. Vincent opened it and stared at the empty shelves, reminder that he'd need to actually buy food at some point, that living in an apartment meant maintaining it, stocking it, existing in it like someone who belonged. He closed the refrigerator and leaned against the counter. Through the window over the sink, He could see the courtyard bathed in security lighting, peaceful and empty at this hour. Somewhere in this complex were other veterans. Patricia had mentioned that during the paperwork signing. The building was designated veteran housing, which meant his neighbors understood nightmares and panic attacks and the particular way trauma carved itself into a person's foundation. Vincent's phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up, squinting at the screen. A text message from Patricia. I know you're probably not sleeping. That's normal for the first few nights. Remember, you're not alone. Call if you need to talk. The message had been sent at 2:45, suggesting Patricia either kept impossible hours or had set up some kind of automated check-in system for new placements. He typed back a response. I'm okay. Thank you. The words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what Patricia had done, but Vincent didn't have better ones. Gratitude felt too small. Hope felt too dangerous. He settled for okay and sent it before he could overthink further. Razor appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving stiffly, arthritis worse in the early morning hours. The dog came to Vincent's side and sat, leaning weight against his leg. Even half asleep, Razor knew when Vincent needed grounding. Vincent's hand found the dog's head automatically. We're really doing this, he murmured, trying to be normal again. The words sounded absurd, spoken aloud in the silent apartment. The caseworker meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning. Vincent had 5 hours to prepare himself for human interaction, for questions about his trauma and his plans and his goals when he barely had the energy to shower regularly. He could cancel, could text Patricia and say he'd made a mistake, that this was too much too fast, that he needed more time. But time hadn't fixed anything in 3 years. More time probably wouldn't help. He forced himself to shower. The water pressure was good, better than the gym showers he'd used when he could afford the membership, infinitely better than the truck stop bathrooms that had been his primary hygiene option for months. He stood under the spray longer than necessary, letting heat work into muscles that carried years of sleeping in cramped positions. When he finally emerged, Razor was waiting on the bathroom mat, patient as always. Vincent dressed in his cleanest clothes, which still showed too much wear, too many washings and laundromat machines. Too many nights slept in when changing seemed like too much effort. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and saw a stranger. Gray in his hair and beard that hadn't been there before Sarah died. Lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. The face of someone considerably older than 43, aged by stress and loss, and the particular exhaustion that came from surviving when part of you wish you hadn't. He fed Razor using the bowls and food Patricia had arranged to be delivered yesterday. The dog ate with the enthusiasm of an animal who remembered hunger, who'd spent deployments on unpredictable feeding schedules and knew not to waste food when it was available. Vincent made himself coffee using the basic supplies that had been stocked in the apartment, generic brand but functional. He sat at the small dining table and tried to remember what normal morning routines looked like for people who had lives and purpose and reasons to exist beyond pure momentum. At 9:30, someone knocked on the door. Vincent's muscles tensed immediately, threat assessment kicking in despite the benign context. Razor stood, alert but not alarmed, reading Vincent's stress without sharing it. Vincent approached the door slowly, looked through the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway, professional but not corporate, holding a messenger bag and wearing an expression of patient waiting. He opened the door partway. Yes. The woman smiled. Mr. Carver? I am Jennifer Martinez. Patricia sent me over a bit early. I hope that's okay. She gestured to the courtyard. I thought we could talk outside if you're more comfortable. Sometimes offices feel too formal. Vincent studied her. Mid-30s, Latina, wearing practical clothes that suggested someone who spent time in the field rather than behind a desk. Her eyes were direct, but not challenging, assessing without judging. Patricia said she specializes in combat veterans. Jennifer's body language suggested she'd heard every story, seen every type of trauma response, and remained unshakable through all of it. Outside is fine, Vincent said. He stepped into the hallway, pulled the door, closed behind him, but didn't lock it. Razor followed without command, taking position at Vincent's left side. Jennifer noticed the dog immediately, her expression shifting to genuine interest rather than polite acknowledgement. "That's Razor?" She crouched down slowly, offering her hand for the dog to sniff. "Patricia told me about his service record. Very impressive." Razor sniffed her hand cautiously, then allowed a brief head pat. Jennifer stood. "He's beautiful. How's he adjusting to the apartment?" "Better than I am," Vincent admitted. They walked toward the courtyard together, Jennifer matching Vincent's pace without rushing. The morning air was cool, pleasant, the kind of weather that made existing outdoors bearable. They found a bench under a tree, sat with comfortable distance between them. Razor settled at Vincent's feet, head resting on his paws, but eyes alert. Jennifer pulled a tablet from her bag, but didn't open it immediately. "Mr. Carver, I want to be clear about what this is and what it isn't. This isn't therapy, though I can connect you with therapists if you want. This isn't judgment about choices you've made or how you've survived. This is case management. My job is to help you access resources, navigate systems, and remove barriers between you and stability." She paused. "That means I need to ask questions that might feel invasive. You can always decline to answer. But the more honest you can be, the better I can help." Vincent nodded. His hands were already shaking, anxiety building despite Jennifer's calm approach. "Ask your questions." Jennifer opened her tablet, pulled up a form. "Let's start simple. Current income?" "None," Vincent said. "Haven't worked in almost 3 years. Can't hold a job when I can't predict whether I'll be functional day to day." Jennifer typed without reaction. "Disability benefits?" "Bakumpansation." Applied twice. Denied both times. Paperwork was too complicated. Kept missing appointments because I couldn't handle waiting rooms. Eventually gave up. "More typing. We can reapply. I'll handle the paperwork and go to appointments with you, if that helps." She looked up. "Medical care, currently?" "Just what I can get at free clinics. Nothing regular." Vincent's voice was flat, reciting facts without emotion. Easier than acknowledging the shame of how thoroughly he'd neglected his own health. "Mental health treatment?" Vincent's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Try that. Got prescribed medication I couldn't afford. Therapist wanted me to talk about things I can't talk about. Stopped going after 3 sessions." Jennifer's expression remained neutral. "Understandable. Therapy doesn't work for everyone, especially when access is inconsistent. We'll explore other options." She made notes. "Housing is obviously handled now. What about food security? When did you last have a full meal?" Vincent had to think about it. 2 days ago, maybe. Found a church that does community dinners. Before that, probably 4 or 5 days. Jennifer looked at him directly. "You've been starving yourself while making sure Razor gets fed regularly." It wasn't a question. Vincent didn't bother denying it. "He needs the food more than I do. He's earned it." "Mr. Carver," Jennifer said carefully, "keeping your dog healthy while neglecting yourself isn't sustainable. Razor needs you functional. That means you need to eat, need medical care, need to treat your own health as important." She typed something else. "I'm setting up food assistance. EBT cards should arrive within the week. In the meantime, I'll have groceries delivered this afternoon. Basic staples, easy-to-prepare meals, enough to get you through until regular benefits kick in." Vincent's throat tightened. This was too much. Too much help, too much kindness, too much investment in someone who'd proven repeatedly that he couldn't be trusted to maintain stability. "I don't know if I can do this," he said. The admission came out broken. All of it. The appointments, the check-ins, the expectations. "What happens when I fail? When I prove I'm not worth the effort everyone's putting in?" Jennifer set down her tablet. "Mr. Carver, let me tell you something. I've been doing this work for 8 years. I've seen hundreds of veterans in situations similar to yours or worse. Some of them make it. Some of them don't. The ones who make it aren't the ones who never fail. They're the ones who keep trying even after failing." She leaned forward slightly. "You've survived 3 years living in your truck while keeping a service dog healthy and safe. You navigated getting turned away from a store and still managed to advocate for what Razor needed. That's not weakness. That's remarkable strength applied to impossible circumstances." Vincent wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that survival counted as achievement, that making it this far meant something. But he'd abandoned his daughter. had run from everyone who tried to help, had chosen isolation over vulnerability, and called it strength when it was really just cowardice. How does someone come back from that? He asked. How do I fix what I broke? Jennifer's expression softened. You start small. You show up to this week's appointments. You eat the food we provide. You take Razor for walks in the courtyard and let yourself be seen by neighbors who might become friends. You call the numbers in your phone when nights get bad instead of suffering alone. She pulled out a schedule from her bag. These are your appointments for this week. Medical evaluation Tuesday. Benefits counselor Thursday. Veterinary checkup for Razor on Friday. All of them I'll attend with you if you want the support. Vincent took the paper with shaking hands. 3 appointments. 3 chances to fail, to not show up, to prove everyone right who'd ever given up on him. But also 3 chances to try. 3 opportunities to be someone other than the person who'd spent 3 years running from his own life. Razor shifted position, pressing harder against Vincent's leg. The dog had been listening to the entire conversation with the particular attention animals gave when sensing their human's distress. Now Razor looked up at Vincent with those steady brown eyes that had never wavered, never judged, never stopped trusting even when Vincent had given him every reason to. I'll try, Vincent said. It was the same commitment he'd made to Patricia yesterday. The same terrifying leap toward hope he'd been avoiding for years. I can't promise I won't fail. Can't promise I'll make it to every appointment or handle everything perfectly. But I'll try. Jennifer smiled. That's all anyone can ask. She stood, offered her hand. I'll see you Tuesday, Mr. Carver. 9 in the morning. Medical Center on Riverside. I'll text you the address and meet you in the parking lot. Vincent shook her hand, feeling calluses that suggested Jennifer understood physical work, understood the kind of effort that left marks. Tuesday, he confirmed. He watched her walk away, professional and purposeful, someone who decided his life was worth the effort of saving. Alone again with Razor, Vincent sat on the bench and tried to process everything that had happened in less than 24 hours. Yesterday morning, he'd been living in his truck, getting thrown out of stores, convinced his life had shrunk to the size of survival and nothing more. Now he had an apartment, a caseworker, appointments scheduled, people invested in his recovery. It was overwhelming and terrifying and felt fragile enough that one wrong move could shatter it all. But he had keys in his pocket, had a dog who trusted him, had people who decided to care whether he made it or not. Maybe that was enough to build on. Maybe trying, even imperfectly, was better than the alternative of giving up completely. Tuesday morning arrived too quickly. Vincent woke at 5 from a nightmare he couldn't quite remember, heart racing, sheets soaked with sweat despite the apartment's comfortable temperature. Razor was already at the bedside, nose pressed against Vincent's face, the dog's weight shifting onto the mattress in the particular way that meant anchor yourself to me. Come back to now. Vincent's hand found Razor's fur and held on while his breathing steadied, while the nightmare fragments dissolved into the safer reality of walls and windows and morning light creeping through curtains. The medical appointment was at 9. Jennifer had texted the address last night, along with a reminder that she'd meet him in the parking lot. Vincent had 4 hours to prepare himself for doctors and questions, and the kind of vulnerability that came with letting strangers examine the ways his body had broken down over years of neglect. He wanted to cancel, wanted to text Jennifer and say he wasn't ready, needed more time, couldn't handle this today. But not showing up meant proving right every doubt he had about his ability to change. He showered and dressed, fed Razor, forced himself to eat the cereal and milk that had appeared in his refrigerator courtesy of Jennifer's promised grocery delivery. The food tasted like cardboard, anxiety killing his appetite, but he made himself finish the bowl. Razor needed him functional. Functional meant eating even when he didn't want to. At 8:30, Vincent loaded Razor into the truck and started driving. The medical center was 15 minutes away, modern building in a medical complex that served both civilian and veteran populations. Vincent pulled into the parking lot at 8:45 and immediately spotted Jennifer's car. She stood beside it, holding 2 coffee cups, watching for his arrival with the patience of someone accustomed to anxious veterans showing up early or not at all. Vincent parked and climbed out. Razor followed, taking position at his left side with a precision that never varied regardless of location or circumstance. Jennifer walked over and offered one of the coffee cups. Thought you might need this. Black, no sugar. Patricia mentioned that's how you take it. The detail, the consideration, the fact that Patricia had shared that information with Jennifer made Vincent's chest tight. He took the coffee with shaking hands. Thank you. The words fell inadequate, but they were all he had. Jennifer smiled. Ready? We're seeing Dr. Patel today. She's excellent, specializes in veteran care, understands trauma responses. If anything gets overwhelming, you can ask to stop. No llamiento, no consecuencias. We just reschedule and try again. They walked into the building together, Razor's nails clicking on polished floors. The waiting room was half full, other patients reading magazines or staring at phones, the universal discomfort of people waiting for medical appointments. Jennifer checked Vincent in at the desk, handled the paperwork he would have struggled to complete on his own, asked questions about insurance coverage Vincent didn't have answers for. They sat in chairs near the corner, away from the television, playing morning news. Razor settled at Vincent's feet, head resting on his paws, but eyes alert. Around them, other patients noticed the dog, noticed the faded tactical vest, noticed Vincent's worn appearance, and made the calculations people always made. Veteran. Service dog. Probably struggling. Some faces showed sympathy. Others showed the particular discomfort people felt around visible brokenness. Vincent Carver? A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, expression professionally neutral. Vincent stood, legs unsteady. Jennifer stood with him. They followed the nurse down a hallway to an examination room, painted in calming blues, decorated with generic landscapes that were supposed to be soothing, but just felt sterile. The nurse took Vincent's vitals without comment, though her expression tightened when she saw his blood pressure numbers. The doctor will be with you shortly. She left, closing the door softly behind her. Vincent sat on the examination table, paper crinkling under him. Razor positioned himself between Vincent and the door, protective stance that suggested the dog remembered too many medical examinations in military contexts, too many times when handlers left examination rooms in worse shape than they entered. Jennifer sat in the visitor chair, scrolled through her tablet, gave Vincent space to manage his anxiety without adding conversational pressure. The door opened. Dr. Patel entered, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the particular confidence of someone excellent at their job. She looked at Vincent, at Razor, at Jennifer, and seemed to understand the entire situation in seconds. Mr. Carver, I'm Dr. Patel. I've reviewed your medical history, what little exists in the VA system. She sat on a rolling stool, making herself eye level rather than looming. I understand you haven't had consistent medical care in several years. Is that accurate? Yes, ma'am, Vincent said. His voice came out rough, throat tight with the effort of not fleeing. Dr. Patel nodded. Then let's start with basics. When did you last have a full physical examination? Vincent had to think. Before Sarah died. So maybe 4 years ago. Longer maybe. And since then? Any medical treatment at all? Free clinics when things got bad enough. Urgent care once when I thought I had pneumonia. Nothing regular. Dr. Patel made notes. I'm going to do the full examination today. Blood work, physical assessment, screening for common issues I see in veterans living without stable housing. Some of it might be uncomfortable. You can ask me to stop at any time. Her eyes moved to Razor. Your dog can stay. I understand he's important for your stability. The examination took 40 minutes. Dr. Patel was thorough and professional, narrating everything she was doing, asking permission before each new assessment. She documented scars Vincent had stopped thinking about, old injuries from deployments that had healed poorly without proper treatment. She checked his heart and lungs, palpated his abdomen, tested reflexes and joint mobility. The blood draw required 3 attempts because Vincent's veins were difficult to find, dehydration from years of inadequate water intake, making the process harder. When it was finished, when Vincent could pull his shirt back on and stop feeling quite so exposed, Dr. Patel rolled her stool closer. Mr. Carver, I'm going to be direct with you. You're significantly underweight. Your blood pressure is concerning. You have signs of chronic stress that suggest your body has been in fight-or-flight mode for extended periods. None of this is surprising given what Jennifer's told me about your living situation. But it does mean we need to address multiple issues simultaneously. Vincent nodded. He'd known he was falling apart. Knowing it and hearing it confirmed by medical authority were different experiences. I'm starting you on blood pressure medication, Dr. Patel continued. I'm also prescribing a multivitamin and recommending you work with a nutritionist to establish regular eating patterns. Your blood work will take a few days to come back, but I suspect we'll find deficiencies we'll need to correct. She typed on her computer. I'd like to see you again in 2 weeks. Check progress. Adjust medications if needed. Make sure you're responding well to treatment. 2 weeks meant another appointment. Another chance to fail, to not show up, to prove he couldn't maintain consistency. But it also meant someone cared enough to want to see him again, to track his progress, to invest in his recovery. Okay, Vincent said. I'll be here. Dr. Patel smiled. Good. She looked at Razor, who'd been motionless throughout the entire examination. Your dog is remarkable. How's he doing health-wise? Arthritis, Vincent said. I've been managing it with medication from the pharmacy. He's due for a checkup Friday. Dr. Patel nodded approval. Make sure he gets that checkup. Service dogs often neglect their own pain to keep working. It's important to stay on top of his care. She stood, offered her hand. It was good to meet you, Mr. Carver. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Vincent shook her hand, feeling the strength in her grip, the certainty of someone who expected he'd actually show up for that next appointment. Thank you, ma'am. Jennifer and Vincent left the medical center together, walked into morning sunshine that felt too bright after the fluorescent examination room. Vincent's hands were still shaking, adrenaline from the vulnerability of medical examination slowly fading. That wasn't so bad, Jennifer said. You showed up. You got through it. That's success. Vincent wanted to argue that simply showing up shouldn't count as success, that the bar was absurdly low if basic functioning qualified as achievement. But he'd spent 3 years not showing up to anything, avoiding medical care and human connection, and every responsibility that required being seen. Maybe Jennifer was right. Maybe showing up actually was success when the alternative had been complete withdrawal. They stood in the parking lot beside Vincent's truck. Jennifer pulled out her tablet. Thursday's appointment is benefits counseling. 10 in the morning, VA office downtown. I'll meet you there. Friday is Razor's veterinary appointment. 2 in the afternoon, clinic on Madison. She looked up. You doing okay? Need anything before Thursday? Vincent considered lying, saying he was fine, maintaining the facade of someone managing. But Jennifer's entire job was helping veterans who weren't managing, and pretending otherwise seemed pointless. The nights are hard, he admitted. I don't sleep well. Apartment feels too quiet after years of ambient noise. Jennifer nodded. That's common. Give it time. Your brain needs to adjust to feeling safe enough to actually rest. She made a note. I'm going to have a white noise machine delivered. Might help with the silence. And Mr. Carver, if you need to call at 3 in the morning, call. That's what the crisis line is for. Patricia's number 2. We'd rather talk you through a hard night than have you suffer alone. Vincent's eyes burned. Too much kindness landing all at once, threatening to crack the armor he'd built around himself. I'll try to remember that. Good. Jennifer touched his shoulder briefly, gesture of connection without demand. You're doing better than you think. Keep going. She walked to her car, drove away, left Vincent standing in the parking lot with Razor and the strange feeling of having completed something, having shown up and survived, and maybe even made progress. He looked down at his dog. Razor looked back with those steady brown eyes, tail wagging slowly, approval clear in every line of the animal's body. We did it, Vincent told the dog. 1 appointment down. The words sounded absurd, celebrating something as basic as seeing a doctor. But Razor's tail wagged harder, the dog reading Vincent's tentative pride and reflecting it back. Vincent drove home to the apartment that still didn't quite feel like his, parked in the designated spot with his unit number painted on the curb, walked through doors that locked behind him into space that belonged to him for as long as he could maintain the trying. He fed Razor and made himself a sandwich from the groceries Jennifer had arranged, forced himself to eat even though anxiety still killed his appetite. His phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Jennifer says you made it to your appointment. Proud of you. Keep going. Vincent stared at the message. Proud of you. When was the last time anyone had said those words to him? When was the last time he'd done something worth being proud of? He typed back a response. Thank you for everything. Hit send before he could overthink it. The afternoon stretched ahead, hours to fill before Thursday's appointment. Vincent could spiral into anxiety about what came next, could obsess over all the ways he might fail, could talk himself into believing this temporary success meant nothing. Or he could just exist, could sit on his couch with Razor beside him and let himself rest in the rare moment of having shown up and survived. He chose rest, chose the couch and the dog and the quiet apartment, chose to believe, just for today, that trying was enough. Thursday arrived with rain, steady drumming against the apartment windows that should have been soothing, but instead set Vincent's nerves on edge. Rain meant limited visibility, meant harder threat assessment, meant conditions that had gotten people killed in places where weather was just another variable to calculate alongside enemy positions and IED likelihood. Vincent knew the response was irrational, that he was safe in an apartment in a city where rain was just weather, not tactical disadvantage. Knowing didn't stop his hands from shaking worse than usual. The benefits counseling appointment was at 10. Vincent sat on his couch at 8, already dressed, already exhausted from the effort of forcing himself not to cancel. Razor lay beside him, head in Vincent's lap, the dog's presence the only thing keeping Vincent from spiraling completely. His phone showed 3 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Probably bill collectors. Probably people wanting money Vincent didn't have for debts he'd accumulated during the slow collapse of his life. He should check the voicemails, should face whatever financial disaster was waiting. But the benefits appointment already felt like more than he could handle, and adding dead anxiety on top seemed like inviting complete breakdown. He put the phone face down on the couch and focused on breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way Kyle had taught him during the panic attack at the pharmacy. His phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Jennifer. I know today is hard. Ray makes everything harder. You can do this. I'll be waiting in the lobby. Vincent stared at the message. How did Jennifer know about rain? About the particular way it triggered hypervigilance in combat veterans who'd learned to associate weather conditions with operational risk? He typed back, on my way, and forced himself to stand before he could change his mind. The drive downtown took 20 minutes through traffic, made worse by the rain. Vincent's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, anxiety making every car feel like a threat, every lane change feel like tactical maneuvering. Razor sat in the back seat, calm despite Vincent's tension, the dog's steadiness a reminder that not everything required the level of alertness Vincent's brain was demanding. The VA office was a squat building that looked exactly like every government facility Vincent had ever entered, designed for function rather than comfort, painted in colors meant to be neutral, but that just felt institutional. He parked and sat in the truck for 3 minutes, trying to gather courage to walk through those doors into a system that had failed him before, that he had no reason to trust would work better this time. Jennifer appeared beside his window, rain beating on her jacket, holding an umbrella. She didn't knock, didn't rush him, just stood there in the rain waiting for Vincent to be ready. Her patience was more effective than any pressure could have been. Vincent opened the door and climbed out. Razor followed, shaking off raindrops with a particular full-body movement that made his tags jingle. They walked to the building together, Jennifer's umbrella providing minimal shelter for all 3 of them. The lobby was crowded with other veterans, some in wheelchairs, some missing limbs, some who looked perfectly fine but carried the invisible injuries that didn't photograph well. A young man, early 20s, sat in the corner with his head in his hands. An older woman stood at the intake desk, voice rising as she argued about paperwork that had been lost for the 3rd time. Vincent's chest tightened. This was why he'd stopped coming. The bureaucracy, the waiting, the sense that everyone here was broken and the system designed to help them was just as damaged. Jennifer must have sensed his distress because she touched his arm lightly. We're not using the regular intake process. I scheduled us with a benefits specialist directly. No waiting room circus. She led him past the desk, down a hallway, to an office where a man in his 60s sat surrounded by stacks of files and multiple computer monitors. He looked up when they entered, face creasing into a genuine smile. Vincent Carver? I am Thomas Chen. Come in, sit down. Let's see what we can do for you. Thomas's office was cramped but organized, every surface covered with the evidence of someone who actually worked rather than just occupied space. He gestured to chairs, didn't react to Razor's presence beyond a brief nod of acknowledgement. Jennifer had sent me your case details, Thomas said. 12 years of service, multiple deployments, handler specialty. You should have been receiving disability compensation years ago. The fact that you're not represents a failure on our part. Vincent sat stiffly in the visitor chair, Razor pressed against his legs. I applied twice. Got denied both times. Was told my conditions weren't service-connected. Thomas pulled up files on his computer, scanned them with the speed of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. Your denials were procedural, not substantive. You missed the medical evaluation appointments. Without those evaluations, the claim's automatically denied. He looked at Vincent directly. Why did you miss the appointments? Because I couldn't handle sitting in waiting rooms without having panic attacks. Because the paperwork was overwhelming. Because every interaction with the VA felt like fighting a system designed to make me give up. Vincent's voice came out harsher than intended, years of frustration bleeding through. Thomas nodded slowly. That's honest. I appreciate honest. He typed something. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to restart your disability claim. I'm going to use the medical evaluation Dr. Patel completed Tuesday as part of the evidence package. I'm going to document the housing instability, the gaps in care, the whole picture of what you've been dealing with. And I'm going to personally shepherd this claim through the system. Vincent wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that maybe this time would be different. But he'd heard promises before from VA employees who meant well, but couldn't deliver against bureaucratic momentum. What makes you think this will work when it didn't before? Thomas leaned back in his chair. Because I've been doing this for 32 years. Because I know every person in every office who touches these claims. Because I'm 3 years from retirement and I stopped caring about making people above me happy, which means I can be as persistent and annoying as necessary to get your claim approved. His expression hardened. And because Jennifer doesn't send me veterans unless they've been failed by the system badly enough that she's personally invested in fixing it. I don't disappoint Jennifer. Jennifer smiled slightly. Thomas has a 97% approval rate on claims he handles personally. You're in good hands. Thomas spent the next hour walking Vincent through every form, every question, every piece of documentation required. He explained the disability rating system, the timeline for claims processing, the various types of compensation available. He pulled up Vincent's service records, noted commendations and deployment dates, built a comprehensive picture of service-connected conditions that range from PTSD to chronic pain to traumatic brain injury from blast exposures Vincent had forgotten about until Thomas pointed them out. When they finished, Thomas printed a stack of forms for Vincent to sign. This is going into the system today. You should hear something within 60 days, probably sooner given the priority status I'm assigning. The back pay alone, once approved, will be substantial. Years of miscompensation. Vincent signed where Thomas indicated, hands shaking so badly his signature was barely legible. What do I do while waiting? How do I survive 60 days? Jennifer answered before Thomas could. The housing you're in now is covered regardless of benefit status. Food assistance is already in place. Medical care is handled. You survive the same way you've been surviving, except now you have support and you're not doing it alone. Thomas added, and if anything goes wrong with this claim, if it gets delayed or denied or lost in the system, you call me directly. He handed Vincent a business card with a personal cell number written on the back. I don't give this to everyone, but I'm giving it to you. Use it if you need to. Vincent took the card, added it to the growing collection in his wallet. Business cards as lifelines, tangible evidence that people cared whether he made it or not. Thank you, he managed. The words felt insufficient for what Thomas had just done, for the hours invested in someone the system had failed repeatedly. Thomas waved off the gratitude. Thank me by showing up to your appointments, by taking care of yourself and that dog, by proving everyone wrong who assumed you were too broken to put back together. That's the thanks I want. They left the office, walked back through the crowded lobby where other veterans still waited for help that might or might not arrive. Vincent felt the weight of privilege, of having Jennifer as an advocate, of bypassing the waiting room circus that had defeated him before. It wasn't fair that access to good help depended on who you knew, on whether someone like Jennifer decided you were worth the extra effort. But fairness was a luxury Vincent couldn't afford to demand. He'd take what he could get and be grateful it existed at all. The rain had lightened to drizzle by the time they reached the parking lot. Jennifer walked Vincent to his truck, Razor trailing behind with the patient endurance of a dog accustomed to human unpredictability. 2 appointments down, she said. 1 more tomorrow with Razor's vet. Then you get a weekend to rest before we start week 2. Vincent opened the truck door, let Razor hop in the back seat. He turned to Jennifer. Why are you doing this? Investing this much time in someone who might fail, who might disappoint you, who definitely isn't the easiest case you've ever handled. Jennifer's expression softened. Because I worked with a veteran 5 years ago who reminded me of you. Same situation, same struggle, same certainty he wasn't worth saving. I convinced him to try. He got housing, got benefits, rebuilt his life. Last year, he started volunteering with a program that helps homeless veterans directly because of what he experienced. She met Vincent's eyes. You're not the end goal, Mr. Carver. You're potentially the beginning of something bigger. Maybe you get stable. Maybe you eventually help someone else get stable. Maybe the investment I'm making in you multiplies in ways neither of us can predict. The words settled into Vincent's chest, heavy and meaningful. He'd thought of himself as a dead end, a cautionary tale, someone beyond redemption. Jennifer was suggesting a different narrative, one where survival could transform into purpose, where being helped could evolve into helping others. It seemed impossible. But then again, a week ago having an apartment had seemed impossible too. I'll try not to disappoint you, Vincent said. Jennifer smiled. You already haven't. You showed up today. That's all I asked. She walked to her car, drove away, left Vincent standing in the drizzle with Razor and the weight of 2 completed appointments and the beginning of belief that maybe, possibly, things could actually get better. Vincent climbed into the truck, sat with his hands on the steering wheel, and looked at Razor in the rearview mirror. The dog looked back with those steady brown eyes, tail wagging slowly, absolute faith that wherever they went next would be okay because they were going there together. Friday, Vincent said, Razor's vet appointment. Then a whole weekend with nothing scheduled, nothing required, just existing and resting and letting himself believe that trying was working. He started the engine and drove toward the apartment that was slowly starting to feel like home. 6 weeks later, Vincent stood in the courtyard of his apartment complex watching Razor play with another dog, a golden retriever belonging to the veteran who lived in Unit 2B. The sight still felt surreal. Razor running, despite the arthritis, tail wagging with genuine joy, behaving like a dog instead of a constant vigilant guardian. The new medication from the veterinary specialist was working better than the generic brand Vincent had been scraping together money for. Razor moved easier, played longer, seemed younger despite the gray spreading through his muzzle. The benefits claim had been approved 3 weeks ago. Thomas had called personally to deliver the news, his voice carrying satisfaction that suggested he'd enjoyed fighting the bureaucracy and winning. The back pay had arrived in Vincent's account 2 weeks later. More money than Vincent had seen in years, enough to buy new clothes that fit properly and stock his refrigerator with actual food instead of whatever was cheapest. Enough to start paying back the debts he'd been avoiding, to fix his truck's increasingly worrying engine problems, to exist without the constant calculation of whether he could afford to eat today or should save it for tomorrow. Vincent had cried when he saw the deposit, had sat on his couch with Razor's head in his lap, and sobbed like something fundamental had broken loose inside him. Jennifer had called that evening, somehow knowing he'd need to talk to someone, and had listened while Vincent tried to articulate what it meant to have financial stability, to not wake up every morning wondering how he'd survive the day. She'd listen without judgment, without rushing him toward gratitude or positivity. Just let him feel whatever he needed to feel. The veteran from Tubi walked over, a man named Marcus who'd served in the army, 2 tours in Iraq, now working as a mechanic and living quiet and stable in ways Vincent was learning to emulate. Dogs look good together, Marcus said. His golden retriever was younger, more energetic, but gentle with Razor in the way good dogs seem to instinctively manage with older animals. They do, Vincent agreed. He'd been practicing this, small talk with neighbors, casual interaction that didn't require deep vulnerability but built connection incrementally. Marcus was easy to talk to, another veteran who understood without needing explanation, who'd invited Vincent to a weekly gathering of veterans in the complex, without pressure when Vincent had declined the first 3 times. "You coming to the cookout Saturday?" Marcus asked. No pressure, but there'll be food and other people who get it. His tone suggested he'd keep asking until Vincent either came or explicitly asked him to stop. Vincent had been thinking about it. The cookout was a monthly thing, veterans from the complex and their families gathering in the courtyard for burgers and conversation. Vincent had watched from his window during the last one, seeing the easy camaraderie, heard the laughter. It had looked both appealing and terrifying. Maybe, he said, that was progress from automatic no. Maybe left room for possibility. Marcus nodded, took the answer for what it was. Offers open. He called his dog, waved at Vincent, headed back toward his apartment. Razor trotted over to Vincent, panting happily, and sat with the perfect precision that never varied regardless of how much playing had preceded it. Vincent's phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. "How are you doing? Haven't heard from you in a few days. Want to make sure you're okay." Vincent typed back. "I'm good. Really good, actually." He attached a photo he'd taken that morning. Razor asleep on the apartment floor in a patch of sunlight, looking peaceful and content. Patricia responded with a heart emoji and the words "proud of you." Keep going. The medical appointments had become routine. Dr. Patel every 2 weeks, monitoring his blood pressure and weight gain and the gradual improvement in vitals that suggested his body was remembering how to exist without constant crisis. The nutritionist Jennifer had connected him with had helped him develop meal plans that were both affordable and actually appealing, teaching him that food could be enjoyable rather than just fuel for survival. Vincent had gained 12 pounds in 6 weeks. Could see it in his face when he looked in the mirror, the hollows filling in, the sharp edges softening. The nightmares hadn't stopped. Probably never would, according to the therapist Patricia had finally convinced Vincent to see. But they were less frequent, less intense, and Vincent had learned techniques for managing them that didn't involve avoiding sleep entirely. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Ramesh, who specialized in combat trauma, understood that healing wasn't linear, that bad weeks would happen, that progress meant trying again after setbacks rather than achieving perfect consistency. Vincent walked back to his apartment with Razor, unlocked the door with keys that no longer felt foreign, stepped into space that had transformed from shelter into home through the accumulation of small personalizations. Pictures on the wall, one of Sarah and Natalie taken years ago when everything had been normal. Books on the shelf, including the astronomy guide he'd carried through deployments and never thought he'd have space to display properly. Razor's bed in the corner, expensive orthopedic foam that Vincent had bought without guilt because the dog had earned every comfort available. The hardest part had been the phone call. Vincent had stared at Natalie's number for 3 days before finally pressing dial. Had rehearsed what to say, how to explain 3 years of absence, how to apologize for abandoning her when she needed him most. The call had gone to voicemail. Vincent had left a message that came out broken and inadequate. "I'm sorry. I know sorry isn't enough. I'm in a better place now. I'm trying to get my life together. If you're willing to talk, I'd like to hear your voice. I love you. I never stopped loving you." Natalie had called back 2 days later. The conversation had been awkward, painful, full of silences neither of them knew how to fill. But she'd listened when Vincent explained about the apartment, the benefits, the slow process of rebuilding. She'd cried when he'd apologized, had said she'd been so scared, had looked for him, had wondered every day if he was alive. They talked for an hour, tentative reconnection after years of severed contact. At the end, Natalie had said maybe we could meet sometime. When you're ready. Vincent had said he'd like that. They hadn't met yet. Vincent was still working up the courage, still terrified of disappointing her again, of proving he couldn't maintain stability long enough to be part of her life. But the possibility existed now. The door he'd slammed shut had opened fractionally. That felt like progress. Vincent made himself lunch, actual cooking using the kitchen he'd been too intimidated to use initially. Simple food, nothing fancy, but prepared with care rather than desperation. He ate at the table instead of standing over the sink, took time to taste rather than just consume. Razor watched from his bed, the dog's presence constant and grounding in the way that had kept Vincent alive through everything. After lunch, Vincent did something he'd been considering for weeks. He called the number Jennifer had given him for a volunteer program that helped homeless veterans, explained that he'd been where they were, that he'd lived in his truck, that he understood the particular shame and isolation and systemic failure that led to sleeping in parking lots. Asked if there was a way he could help, even just talking to people, letting them know that coming back from rock bottom was possible. The program coordinator, a veteran named Rachel, had been enthusiastic. We always need people who've lived it, who can speak from experience rather than theory. She'd invited him to an orientation meeting next Tuesday. Vincent had said yes before fear could make him reconsider. That evening, Vincent sat on his couch with Razor beside him and thought about how far he'd come in 6 weeks. From living in his truck to having an apartment. From starving himself to gaining healthy weight. From avoiding all human connection to considering attending a cookout. From complete isolation to volunteering to help other veterans. The transformation felt fragile, like one bad day could shatter everything he'd built. But the foundation was stronger than it had been. The support system was real. The try was working. His phone rang. Kyle's name appeared on the screen. Vincent answered. Hey. Kyle's voice carried warmth. Just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a bit. Want to make sure you're still showing up to life. Vincent smiled. I'm showing up. Going to appointments. Eating regularly. Even considering going to a cookout this weekend. Kyle laughed. That's huge. Proud of you, man. Keep it up. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important, easy conversation between people who understood shared experience. When they hung up, Vincent felt connected in ways he'd forgotten were possible. Saturday arrived with clear skies. Vincent stood at his window watching the cookout setup, seeing veterans and families gathering, hearing laughter and conversation drifting up from the courtyard. Razor sat beside him, tail wagging in anticipation because the dog somehow knew Vincent was considering actually going. You think we should? Vincent asked the dog. Razor's tail wagged harder. Vincent took a breath, put on clean clothes, grabbed his keys, walked downstairs with Razor at his side, and stepped into the courtyard where people immediately welcomed him, made space, introduced themselves, treated him like he belonged. Marcus handed him a burger. Someone's kid asked if they could pet Razor. Vincent said yes and watched children be gentle with his dog while parents smiled approval. If you've connected with this story, if it reminded you that recovery is possible even from the darkest places, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated only to see them reclaim their strength? Share your thoughts below, and if stories like this resonate with you, please subscribe. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is accept help and keep trying. Thank you for watching. Vincent stood in the sunshine, surrounded by other veterans who'd survived their own battles and found their way to something like peace. Razor leaned against his leg, solid and steady. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be bad days, setbacks, moments when the trying felt impossible. But Vincent wasn't alone anymore. Wasn't invisible. Wasn't running. He was here, present, showing up to life one day at a time. And that finally felt like enough. Still here, he thought, the old mantra taking on new meaning. Still here. Still trying. And this time, try was actually working.